I'll get out the way for you to get the banner.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Some people like to, I don't think you want me to start singing, so therefore, if I can have your attention, because we can sing together, but we can't talk together. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Thank you, Victoria. You have always been, that has been helpful. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Communities of Color Madison Cast Town Hall and Candidate Debate. My name is Joseph Feaster, a longtime member of COC and co-host of today's program. Thank you. On my day job, I'm an attorney at the law firm of James Wilkie, and my community activities have been many, but at the present time, I am chair of the board of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. I am going to wait my co-host, Representative China Tyler, to join me, but at this time, I'd like to invite to the podium the state representative from the 9th Suffolk District to bring greetings. Let's put our hands together and welcome State Representative John Santiago.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's great to be here. First, I'm going to start off with thanking the COC for the numerous co-hosts who put this important event tonight on such an important and timely issue. I want to take a quick second to represent some of the electeds in the room. I see Representative Russell Holmes here. Give him a round of applause. And I think I saw Councilor Frank Baker earlier today. There he is over there. Councilor Frank Baker is the city councilor who represents the part of Madison Cast. And so I first and foremost want to welcome you to Roxbury. If you're not from Roxbury, welcome. It is an honor to be the 9th Suffolk State Representative, which includes this part of Roxbury, in conjunction with China Tyler, who I think she'll be coming momentarily. But I want to express to you how important this debate is to me, as someone who lives just a couple of blocks away from Madison Cast, as someone who represents the area, but as also someone who is an ER physician at Boston Medical Center. I work every Friday, Saturday, Sunday night at the hospital. There's not a shift that goes by where I don't care for someone or a family that's impacted by the opioid epidemic. And right there at Madison Cast, it really is the nexus of three crises: mental health, substance use, and homelessness. It's an incredibly complex one, so that's why I'm looking forward to this debate. These three debates, the DAs, the sheriff, the candidates, and the sub-candidates, to learn from them and to maybe work with them in what capacity as we move forward. So thank you again for coming to Roxbury. Enjoy the debate.
Just one housekeeping matter. If you can turn off your phones, that would be great. So we will have, I know I had to turn off mine to remember. We're now in this age where we constantly have our phones on, and so it would be great if you would do that. That would be very much appreciated. I first want to thank Hibernian Hall for permitting us to use this facility for this particular program. This is one of our community gems, and we're always pleased that they are always open to having community activities here. So I want to thank Hibernian Hall and its staff for allowing us to be here. I also want to take the time to thank the sponsors, COC, the Ward Democratic Committees 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, 17, and 18, Black Minister Alliance, the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, the New Market Business Association, and Boston Medical Center. So let's give those organizations a hand. You see several setups here as far as, and this is being videoed. I know it could also be live streamed. I have to find that out from Darrell Smith, whether that's the case. This is being live streamed, and I want to thank BNN TV for doing that. So let's give BNN TV a hand. Now let me tell you a little bit about who is the Communities of Color, or COC as we call ourselves. COC was co-founded in 1994 by Darrell Smith and Brooke Woodson. The impetus for initiating COC was the deficit of blacks in Boston having a role in the political landscape in Massachusetts, particularly here in Boston. Thus, COC was born. Since then, COC has worked on numerous political campaigns, most notably the campaign of the late U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy, the campaign of the late Mayor of Boston, Tom Menino, and the campaign of former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick. COC has participated in political forums, educational sessions, and programs like today's. And certainly if you're interested in learning more about COC, please contact any of the members of COC, Darrell Smith, or myself. But today's program is focusing on mass and caste because COC recognizes that much needs to be done on a regional basis to address the deplorable conditions facing those persons in camp and mass and caste, and that government, on the federal, state, and local level must join together to devote resources to address this issue. So COC is hosting today's candidate debates to bring attention to the mass and caste issue and to have these candidates on the record on how he or she might address the mass and caste issue and more. Now, today's program had 4 segments, but because of the weather, we canceled our tour, which is going to be with many political persons and community leaders in and around the mass and caste area. We were going to have a town hall, but to move the program along, we decided to go directly to our debate. And our debate is going to be on candidates for the Suffolk County Sheriff, Suffolk County District Attorney, and the Suffolk County 2nd Suffolk District State Senate candidates. This portion of the program is going to be moderated by award-winning journalist and host of City Line on WCBB TV, Karen Holmes Ward. And I'm going to ask Karen to hold because I'm going to be able to introduce her. I want to let you give her the applause that she so rightly deserves, because I noticed that my co-host has joined me, and so I want you to come on up here. This is Representative China Tyler. Now I'm going to give her an opportunity to give her a welcome, but I got to tell you something about her, so I made sure that I pulled some information. I know a lot about her since she's a Northeastern gal, Northeastern University gal, and a community person. But let me just give you a little bit of information. Representative Tyler was born and raised in Roxbury, which establishes a special place in the heart for the district. She credits programs offered to her as a child with the authentic sense of pride she feels as a Roxbury native. That pride is what encouraged her to represent the residents of Boston. After earning her Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice with a minor in Law, Policy, and Social Society from Northeastern University, She began her career as a case manager for federal inmates, assisting those nearing release with securing employment, housing, and community support. From that experience, she grew to understand the importance of state government in delivering valuable resources to the most vulnerable populations. In 2016, of course, at a tender age, I won't say what age, Representative Tyler ran a successful campaign to succeed longtime incumbent for the Massachusetts House of Representatives in the 7th Suffolk District. Thank you. That sounds like a kid. She is currently serving her second term as Massachusetts State Representative and is the Vice Chair of the Public Health Committee and Chair of the Boston Delegation. Let's put our hand together and welcome my co-host.
So good afternoon, everyone. Let me start off by thanking everybody that paved the way for me to be here. Thank you so much, Joe, and to the entire Communities of Color organization for allowing me to co-host. I moved on from being the chair of the Public Health Committee. Now I am graciously and so honored to be able to chair the Massachusetts Black and Latino Caucus, where we have paved many trails for people like us to be able to access more opportunity. And so I want to second say thank you to all the candidates that are in all the races that we're highlighting today. It takes a lot to be able to get into these races and to be able to share your platform and to be able to uplift the things that folks that you know about, that want to hear and want to see in your different races. And so thank you all for being in the race. Thank you to the community. That's my number one thing, for showing up. Make sure you continue to show up. These seats are very important seats. We have the DA seats, which is very responsible for all things that are legal within our judicial system and courts. We have our Suffolk County Sheriff race, which again, courts involved and more local to our community here, of people doing less than 3 years, we'll see the sheriff. And also too, very importantly, the Senate race. I had the pleasure to be able to serve on the redistricting committee this year, where we were able to battle it out to create a Senate seat that reflects the Black and Latino community. That was a very hard job to be able to do, but we got it done. So I want to say thank you to all the candidates for putting your name in the race to be able to serve as one of the very few, one of two, to be honest, Black senators, which we will have this September. So thank you all for being here. I look forward to engaging, and thank you so much to our host today, Karen. You're amazing, and I look forward to the presentation. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, representatives. So now, let me introduce our moderator for today of our debates. That is the award-winning Karen Holmes Ward. You tune in on Sundays at 12 noon. You will see her handling her business, making sure that the information that we need in our community is brought forward, looking at the issues here in Boston and throughout Massachusetts, and the reality is she does it so well. But let me tell you a little bit about Karen, and then I'll have her come along with the panelists for the first segment. Karen Holmes Ward is the Director of Public Affairs and Community Service, as well as host and executive producer of Cityline, WCVB's award-winning weekly magazine program, which addresses accomplishments, concerns, and issues facing people of color living in Boston and its suburbs. She has had many notable guests: Regina King, Forrest Whitaker, Octavia Spencer, Denzel Washington, Spike Lee, Louis Gossett, and if I listed all of the notable people she had, we would be here, and then I would tell you have a good evening. Cityline has been the recipient, Karen and Fort Cityline has been a recipient of the Associated Press Massachusetts Rhode Island Best Public Affairs Program and has received numerous Emmy nominations. Karen was part of the team honored with the National Association of Broadcasters Service to Community and Television Award for WCVB's community service efforts during and following the Boston Marathon attacks. Karen has enjoyed a 40-year career in broadcasting, including early stints as a writer at WEEI News Radio, news director at WILD, where she hosted a daily one-hour talk show, and she was a reporter at WGBH-TV. She was inducted into the 2018 Massachusetts Broadcasters Hall of Fame, an honor bestowed upon individuals for their outstanding achievement and unparalleled contributions to the broadcasting industry in Massachusetts. She has received numerous community awards, too numerous in order to mention. Please put our hands together and welcome our moderator, Karen Holmes.
Thank you, Joe and China. And it is just lovely to see all of you out here today. It's hot outside. We're going to have some hot conversation in here. And it's so nice to see everyone coming out for this very, very important event sponsored by the Communities of Color. And I'm honored to have been asked to moderate. First order of business, I'm going to introduce our panelists for this evening. Please welcome Boston Herald reporter Sean Phillips Cotter. He covers Boston City Hall. He's a South Shore native. He previously covered Quincy Hall for the Patriot Ledger and local politics and crime in Pennsylvania for the York Dispatch, winning awards for his reporting in both papers. Sean's a graduate of Syracuse University, fan of Patriots football, long drives, overly strong coffee, and bad puns. Yes, come on up. And Dorchester reporter Seth Daniel has been on the beat in the Northeast Ohio and Greater Boston since 1996, enjoying a variety of reporting styles and mediums, including photo editing, news photography, copy editing, and networking. He's been reporting on news and features in Boston for more than 20 years. Let's give a hand to Sean and Seth. Now, before we get started, let's talk about a few of the ground rules. Now, the candidates have already been given the debate ground rules, but I'm going to share some with you. The first question for each section will come from me, the moderator. The subject of the first question will be the situation at Madison Cass. Each candidate will be allowed a specific time to respond to that. There will be no opening remarks from the candidates, just an opening comment about what they'll be doing at Madison Cass. The debate, each section will last about 45 minutes from beginning to end, including all introductions and conclusions. The topics, the order and length of responses will be determined exclusively by the moderator in conjunction with the COC team. Candidates and panelists have been advised of the topics in advance of today's debate. The panelists will address questions to the candidates, and the candidates will be expected to answer every question. For the DA and sheriff debates, no more than 90 seconds will be allowed for answers from each candidate, and 60 seconds for responses from each candidate. The maximum times allowed for the Senate debate will be 90 seconds. The moderator, along with the COC staff and volunteers, will keep candidates informed of their elapsed time and will enforce the time limits. Our timekeepers sitting right here in the front row, State Representative Russell Holmes. If you give a shout out and raise your hand, Russell Holmes will be keeping our time for us. And the candidates will have an opportunity to make closing statements and closing remarks are limited to 90 seconds. Now I'm going to ask someone up in the audio booth. I hear a little bit of a trace of music.
Take this shit off. We'll keep coming.
It's gone now. Is it gone? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Oh, it's still there.
He's trying. It's off now. People just don't know.
Playlist.
They don't know how to stop calling.
I thought I heard it coming out of the speakers, but we'll take care of it as the evening goes on. All right, now that we've established how we're going to move forward this evening, please help me welcome the first candidate of the evening for Suffolk County Sheriff. Suffolk County Sheriff Steve W. Tompkins has been a member of the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department since 2002. He was appointed to serve as the Sheriff of Suffolk County on January 22nd, 2013 by the then Governor of Massachusetts, Bob Patrick. In November of 2014, he was elected to the office. As the former Chief of External Affairs for the department, Mr. Tompkins supervised his own division and was a member of his predecessor's 9-person executive team, which was responsible for the day-to-day management of all Sheriff's Department operations. Before assuming his post at the Sheriff's Department, Mr. Tompkins served as the Director of Marketing and Public Affairs for the Denton Community Health Center and served for 10 years at AT&T Cable prior to its purchase by Comcast Cablevision. Mr. Tompkins holds a bachelor's degree in communications from Boston College and a master's degree in public affairs from the University of Massachusetts. Steve Tompkins, Sheriff Tompkins, please join us on stage. Next, please meet community activist Sandy Zamora-Khalid. For 16 years, Sandy Zamora-Khalid served in the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department, where she acted as coordinator for community outreach and programming. She was promoted to the position of Director of External Affairs in 2013 before becoming the Chief of External Affairs and Communications in 2014. Her civic work includes serving as president of the Hazleton Street Association, a member of the Mattapan Economic Development Initiative, and serving on the board of the Young Professionals Network of the Urban Elite and Communities of Color. Prior to serving at the Sheriff's Department, Ms. Calix was an investigator for the Department of Industrial Accidents and the Department of Treasury. Ms. Calix holds a master's in criminal justice from Northeastern University, a bachelor's of arts in psychology, and a graduate certificate in social justice from Harvard Extension School, an off-campus program of Harvard University. Please welcome community activist Sandy Zamora. Everybody have a seat. Here we go. Our first question will ask each of you, if elected, what you plan to do about mass and cash. And you'll each have 3 minutes to respond. Timekeeper down front, statute. And following that 3-minute opening statement, each of you will have 1 minute to offer a rebuttal to the previous statement. So, yeah, let's try to keep the music shut off, please. All right. Someone will keep working on that and we'll proceed. Suffolk County Sheriff Steve Tompkins, you first, if elected. What do you plan to do about mass and cash?
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank COC and all the boards and Hello.
There we go.
As I was saying, I want to thank COC for bringing us all together along with the associated boards and sponsors. Insofar as Massacast is concerned, last September I was called by the Boston Globe and asked what we would do or what we could do, what ideas that we had for helping out something that really is a humanitarian crisis. It's right on our doorstep. And so what we offered was an opportunity to take people off the street, particularly with the winter coming, offer them housing, clothing, food, medication, family reunification, in one of our facilities that's built more like a college dormitory. We were not going to lock the doors, keep the doors closed, or we were not going to have them in inmate jumpsuits. They were going to be in khakis and in polo shirts. What we wanted to do was to make sure that they did not freeze outside, that they did not die outside, and that
until the city or the state could do something about bringing more beds on board, somebody needed to do something. That was our proposal to try to help. Now let me say this to you. My mother for far too long suffered from alcohol use. So I get it. I understand the struggles and the pain that those families are going through. And I was hired by the citizens of Suffolk County to be the sheriff. And I figure like this: if you can do something to help, you should do something to help. But from the very beginning, I always said if the state or the city would provide those beds, then by all means, that's what should happen. Near the end of her term, Mayor Kim Janey came up with a plan that I thought was pretty darn good, as a matter of fact, but it was too close to the end of her term. The next mayor, Mayor Wu, came in, and she said that she had a more holistic approach. Now, you haven't heard us say anything untoward about either mayor's approach to it, but I will say this. When you have an open-air drug market, when you have trafficking of men and women, when you have fornication and defecation on the streets, when people that work there cannot get to work, when people that live there are uncomfortable, something needs to be done. And so we offered the opportunity to help get something done. It was not taken up. It was not taken up. It was not taken up. But the offer still stands. And for anyone to say that we were trying to criminalize the situation, I think that's not only is it wrong, it's negligent. What do? Do we just let people die on the street if we can help? And so we offered to help. Now, you haven't heard a word from me since. I'm not forcing that issue. If the city or the state wants our help, we'll offer it. If they don't, that's fine. That's not a part of our mandate. So that is what we offered to do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Woo!
Would you like to offer 1 minute rebuttal to his opening statement? All right, very good. So I'll address the first question to you. If elected, what do you plan to do about the situation at Madison Cass?
Good evening, thank you for having this evening. When we look at what's happening out at Madison Cass as a public health crisis, what we see on a daily basis is traumatizing not only to the residents there, to the people struggling with substance use disorder, but also the people that ride by there every single day that work in the community. Now, when we look at what needs to be done, there needs to be a comprehensive approach to this. It needs to be led by the governor so that we can call in local cities and towns to come to the table and address the situation. Not one agency, not one city or town can deal with this. Boston should not be the city to have to financially deal with all of this alone. So I say that. In addition to that, I want to talk about the proposal. I was at the Sheriff's Department when I resigned in January, and before that I was at the table in executive meetings talking about Sheriff Tompkins' proposal. I said to him in his office that we should not deal with the day-to-day services. What we should do, and let me be clear, this is a building that we were in contract with ICE, where we held undocumented immigrants. So what I said was we should rent, lease, or contract with the Department of Public Health or the Department of Mental Health and let them deal with their day-to-day services. That is not our specialty, okay? Furthermore, at the time, we were also continue to struggle with a staffing shortage. Officers are being closed into state 3 to 4 times during the week. So we did not have the staffing, nor did we have the mental health staffing at the time either, because after I left, they switched and changed the staffing so that they could have adequate staffing for mental health. So they may have it now, but I'm telling you, they did not have it when I was there. In addition to that, changing them into khakis or polo shirt doesn't change the training that individuals receive to render that care. We need to leave it to the professionals, we need to leave it to the experts. But equally sad, my opponent has continually said that once his proposal was not received, we have not heard a peep out of them. That is not acceptable. There can be a plan B. Let's get together with experts. Let's get together with community of people and talk about how can we move forward together so that we can rectify the situation and at least get some people off the streets and reassure that they come back to the community and they will be successful. Thank you.
According to our rules, Sheriff Tompkins, you have 1 minute if you'd like to respond to something that you heard in your opening statement.
I would. As Chief of External Affairs, my opponent kind of doesn't understand how it works internally. First and foremost, we're a state agency. We cannot rent or lease or do any of that sort of stuff with this building. The building is not ours. It belongs to the state. They have jurisdiction over that, so we cannot do that in this particular instance. Now, the arrangement that we had with ICE was one that was built with the state. The state was intimately involved with that. Furthermore, we do have the medical professionals to help these people out. I still say to you, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to walk past a humanitarian crisis and just let people die? I just think that is so negligent. And so yes, we would offer to help. We will help because that's what we should do. At the end of the day, we are our brothers and sisters keepers, and we need to comport ourselves as such. If people here don't understand that, then I'm sorry to say, that's what we have to do as a community.
Thank you. Now we're going to go through a series of questions that are important to our community. In this round, each candidate will have an opportunity to offer a response of 1.5 minutes, and then the candidate rebuttal will be 1 minute. In this section, we will have questions predetermined by our panelists, offered by, first, Boston Herald's Sean P. Cotter. Reentry. This is on reentry.
What? Is this working? There we go. On the topic of reentry into the community, what wraparound programs are needed to help returning citizens integrate better into day-to-day life? What right now is working and what is not?
Sheriff Tompkins?
What people do need, Sean, is wraparound services, and not just deal with the individual, but we have to deal with individual families also. We've created a program called Family Matters, where we act as an intermediary between the families that have to give us written permission to do that, and the individual. A lot of families do not know where the services are or that they even exist. You see, we created this program for a set number of individuals. Those are coming from the most chaotic households, because we don't want to get somebody back up on their feet and then send them back into a situation that's calamitous. And so you need that wraparound service for that continuum of care. What we do is we bring in outside partners to work with individuals while they're with us, so that when they leave, they can make what's called a warm call versus a cold call. And in September, we're about to start our own office of returning citizens, wherein we can bring people from downstairs to meet with the different practitioners for all of the services that they need, once again, so that when they leave, they will be able to call someone that they know. Oftentimes, when people leave us, they don't call these agencies or entities because they don't, either they don't have a relationship with them, they're uncomfortable calling, or they just don't want to. But if we can establish these relationships while they're still with us, it makes it all the more easier for them to take use of those services when they leave.
Thank you. Sheriff. 1 minute.
Talks about his Family Matters program. According to his 5-year annual report, out of 5 years, they've helped 237 families. Out of 5 years, out of the thousands of people that have been through the Sheriff's Department. And I recommend all of you look at that 5-year report that was recently put out. Because what it doesn't do is talk about outcomes. What it doesn't do is talk about how viable the programs are. And what it doesn't do is track recidivism to see who has returned back to the community. So I find it quite interesting that we continually talk about the Family Matters program because there's so much work that needs to be done with it.
Thank you. Our next question is about mental health, and it will be posed by Dorchester reporter Seth Daniels.
So on topic of mental health, police officers are successfully cross-trained as social workers, recovery specialists, and best clinicians. Would you advocate prison correction officers cross-trained as mental health clinicians, or and other staff, or is there a better way to address these issues within the population that's incarcerated?
This round, community activist Sandy Zamora will respond first. She has 1.5 minutes.
Actually, no, I would not. We have to, first of all, again, I'm going to keep saying this, we need to assess the program. then we need to see what's working, what's not, and then we need to hire mental health officials to deal with that. I do not believe in general practitioners, and that's what we're doing by also including that in the training. Yes, they should be able, we should have evidence-based, which we do not, implicit, explicit bias training. Yes, we should be teaching them to realize and recognize triggers for de-escalation methods and also racist biases, so that we can de-escalate and then bring mental health professionals in so that they can deliver the services that are needed for the care of the people in our custody.
Very good. We'll have Sheriff Tompkins, 1 minute, if you'd like to respond.
Sure. We do have full-blown medical staff. It's not officers that are handling the mental health situation. It's medical practitioners working in conjunction with those outside of our facility to work. And yes, I do believe that as many people as we can train to identify the problems that people have in our department, I think that makes us a better, stronger department. In fact, in all of the academies that we have now, we are actually recruiting people that have a sociology and psychology background because we want them to understand what's going on with the mental makeup of the people that they're going to have jurisdiction over. So I think it's crucially important that they get that cross training so that they know and they can deal with individuals and then follow that information over to the medical practitioners that can help them out. I just want to say this about Family Matters. So you referenced the 5-year report. Family Matters was created 3 years ago, and the recidivism rate in the Commonwealth is 46%, and the Family Matters program is 7%.
Recidivism, and will come from the Boston Herald's Sean P. Cotter.
What programs that are currently available for people incarcerated are working, similar to the previous question about reentry programs? What current programs inside the jails right now are working to help people gain skills that they need outside of it, and what are not working?
First, you have a minute and a half.
We have beginning with our community works program, where we actually teach vocational education, carpentry, landscaping, discrimination, printing, and painting, and the like. We also talk to the unions about their apprenticeships and having our individuals leave us begin some apprenticeships, and we've had some pretty good success with that. We have a peace program. The peace program is built for the 18 to 24-year-old cohort in our facility. As we all know, the brain doesn't fully mature until 25 or 26. And so we offer them and intensify different academic curriculum to make sure that when they get out, we can get them into either Roxbury Community College or Bunker Hill. We've had some pretty good success with that. We have the Oasis program, and it's built to be a substance abuse program, so that those that are suffering mightily from substance abuse have at least 90 days. I don't believe a 10 or 12 or 14-day program for substance abuse is going to work. 90 days has been more beneficial. And then I go back to the Family Matters program that has also shown some real good success. And so when we talk about reentry, when we talk about recidivism, the recidivism rate, as I mentioned, is 46%. We know half of those people that left on Friday will be back in 30 to 60 days. The question is, how do you want them to go back home? And so on all of our programs, we are trying to make sure that they get the services and that their families, which is crucially important, to get the services so that you don't consider them.
Thank you. Well, please, you have 1 minute if you'd like to offer a response.
Yeah, I won't take that away from the sheriff's department. They do have about 90 programs as it is in their report. What's interesting, the question was reentry, correct? So I don't recall hearing how many people actually got jobs from some of these programs. That has not been told. 717 people took the 30-hour OSHA training. How many people got jobs? How many people got jobs with the union? There's no tracking system. We don't know. We just know how many people are attending the programs. And again, like Family Matters, it's the 5-year report. And again, go look at it and see. And look at the numbers. I don't know where that 7% recidivism rate is. Just not in the report. It's just being told and it's being said. There is no tracking mechanism. There's no research department. And I will put a research department at the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department so we can see if individuals are coming back, so we can see if the programs are working. Without that, we just do not know, and that's factual.
The next question is about the school to prison pipeline. It will come from Seth Daniels from the Dorchester Reporter.
On the school to prison pipeline. There are many outspoken school violence and community violence advocates that I've heard from recently in Boston right now who are not convinced the school to prison pipeline exists as it has been described in some of the more prominent studies. To what extent do you believe conditions in the public schools lead to incarceration with the Sheriff's Department? And is this school to prison pipeline correlation accurate?
Cindy, someone please, you'll respond first in a minute and we'll have.
One here. My daughter's 2 years ago, she goes to BPS. She's on the spectrum, she's high functioning. And she was severely bullied, and I went through a lot with the school system to protect her. Now, is there a pipeline to prison? Yeah, there is, but there's a bunch of reasons why. Because the support is not in the school system. When our children are being traumatized by certain situations, there is no communication, there's no transparency. And furthermore, we have to do a better job as the Sheriff's Department when we have individuals in our care, especially at the young men that we're talking about, and using evidence-based programming, like the Safe Youth Initiative Program, which is a federal program that's being used in 13 other municipalities, so we can give not only employment to our young men, not only, we need to give them mental health, we need to give them opportunities, job opportunities. So these are the things that we need to look at, and we have to do better. And it also requires a sheriff that's going to stand out past their mandate and also address the fact that 60 to 70% of the population that comes to us has a 5th to 7th grade education. So the problem begins when they're in BPS, and there needs to be advocacy for that. That we can't talk about second chances if we're not talking about first chances. We have to tackle them both together.
Yeah, thank you very much. So 60% of those that are in our care and custody began their road to incarceration by choice, starting in 6th grade. And so I do agree with Sam that we do need more resources inside of the school. It's interesting what happens between the urban schools and the suburban schools. When trauma hits the suburban schools, they bring in all manner of things. When it hits the urban schools, that is not in evidence. That is a fault of the state. I think that they really need to wrap their arms around that. But further, we have a choice program where we send officers into the schools, beginning with the middle schools and the high schools, to talk about how they can safeguard themselves, making good choices, particularly who their friends are, staying out of trouble, staying away from drugs. We also need to have, as these kids get older, summer jobs. Because without that, they get to the streets, they potentially could get in trouble. And finally, the families really need to be offered more social service avenues. When you get your electricity bill, they're showing you all manner of ways to lower the cost of electricity, but we don't get that with social service agencies, so the families are working at a desk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next question is about prevention and intervention, and it's from the Boston Herald's Mr. Cotter.
Let's circle back around to what you both were talking about earlier regarding using the jail, specifically the formerly ICE portion of the jail, as housing or shelter space, or however you want to characterize it. To the sheriff, obviously some people in the audience, you heard a reaction where people really didn't like what you were saying there. And so I was just looking to see if you wanted to elaborate further on criticism from people about how this is just putting people in jail.
Is that your question? Is that the question, or are you offering him an opportunity to?
No, that's the question.
Okay, very good. A minute and a half.
I go back to the fact that we are not just talking about putting people in jail, we're trying to help a humanitarian crisis. As I said, if the city or the state found other places for them to go, I'm fine with that, that's okay. But in the absence of that, do we just let people kind of lay about on the streets when we do have the resources, when we do have the people power to help? And so people in the audience might think that what we're trying to do is untoward. Okay, I respect that, but I still maintain that if you're in that neighborhood on a day in and day out basis, and you're seeing what these people are going through, you really think that you, or at least we think, that we should try to help. Now, we happen to be an incarceration facility, that is true, but we have space, we have food, we have clothing, we have medication, we have family reunification, we have caseworkers. So why should we not offer that help? I just think that that's negligent insofar as saying, that's okay. You're an incarceration facility. Let them stay on the streets. Let them languish in all of the squalor that's out there. I see it a little bit differently. You see it a little bit differently. That's fine. That is what civic engagement is all about. So hopefully we can have these conversations, find some common ground, find some compromise, so that we can help our fellow citizens. That's all we were trying to do. Is help.
Is the fact that there's a building that can be used. And the only two proposals I've ever heard for that building, besides the fact that we had undocumented immigrants in there, was either when the proposal for Madison and essential lockup, from my understanding that they're going back in that direction. So we need to get rid of the mentality of locking people up first and foremost. And secondly, we need to start acting like we have a state agency and we can't get the powers to be to sit at the table with us and see what we can do for the building. So we are not a private entity, we are a state agency. And if we have space, let's have the conversation. But if the conversation is not being had, let's not say we can't do it.
Thank you. Our next question is about accountability and transparency, and the question will come from Seth Daniels of the Dorchester Reporter.
So accountability and transparency, both have been top items for all law enforcement centers recently. When individuals are incarcerated or held in Suffolk County jails or houses of correction, can the department better communicate with families about well-being and mental health issues that are happening around the loved ones in custody?
Okay. So let me first start by saying that, because I've been told that I don't know HIPAA laws and what we can and can't do. I'm fully aware of what we can and can't do. First and foremost, we have people in our care, we need to humanize them, okay? It takes nothing to make a phone call and say to a family that there has been an incident in our care. Unfortunately, I cannot disclose that information. However, this is where you need to call so that you get the information that you need, and that should come from the leader of the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department. So first and foremost, and in terms of what needs to be put in place for transparency, we need to form an advisory board. We do not have one. One that has someone that has been incarcerated, someone, a family member that's been incarcerated, mental health, education, the private sector, so that we can talk about what we can bring together. We don't need to invent nice acronyms. We need to put things in place that are working. Furthermore, we can and we should create a public-facing database that puts raw data out. And yes, we can do that without compromising people's privacy because we do not have to put names out. We don't do that. And in terms of transparency, we also need to work on our communication with the community. We need to also make sure that we open the lines of communications with our officers and be present and meet the officers and meet the staff where they're at. That is not happening. And in addition to that, another thing about transparency, we need to work on the fact that my opponent is currently asking his staff for donations to his campaign. Unacceptable. It may be legal, but it's unethical. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm rather intrigued by the passion of my opponent here. There again, she's a little off base here. We do communicate with the families. We do let them know what's going on with their loved ones with us. That is a fact. In the case of death, when somebody dies in our department, the district attorney's office comes in, the Boston police come in. They do an investigation as well as we do an investigation. If there's something untoward, you would hear about that from either the police or the district attorney. That's who takes over the cases. Now, Sandy's right. Because of HIPAA regulations, we cannot discuss how a person died in our facilities. But what we tell them is, go to the courts, petition the courts to be that person's representative. Once that is done, then they can go to their medical examiner. And the medical examiner can give them far more information than an incarceration facility can give them. That's a fact.
Thank you. I think we have an opportunity for some follow-up questions from our panel about Madison Cass.
I specifically had one, I think there was also a
Yes.
use of force question as well, that category that was
What category do you have?
Use of force.
Use of force, let's go to that instead.
And it's just segueing right into that. There have been reported news, several people dying in custody. What's going wrong there and what needs to be done differently?
I think my first on this one was.
Yes.
So, let me say this. I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree with you. Well, the 4 people that died, hold on 1 second, please. The 4 people that passed away last summer, frankly, should not have been there. And it's just a confluence of incidents that said they died on our watch. Let me say this to you. They died within 48 hours of coming to us. So they hadn't even been there that long. It wasn't like we did anything on boards to help them along that path of expiring. They would have left, they would have passed wherever they were. As I said, hold on, please. Because that is true. You don't okay, anyway, here's the deal. Here's the deal. It is true. And you can ask the district attorney, you can ask the police. Okay, that is, okay, what's that?
Don't respond, just keep going,
Well, it's hard to keep going when they're shot.
All right, we'll ask them to please. Give them 30 more seconds to finish, okay. Thank you.
Let me know when it goes. So, insofar as what the young lady just said, yes, people have passed away in our facility and in other correctional facilities. We work mightily to make sure that that does not happen, but it does happen. And what we try to do is not only work with the families, but we work with the other law enforcement agencies to make sure, and medical agencies, to make sure the information is gotten to the families.
All right, thank you very much. And we'll have 1 minute from Sandy, who'd like to respond.
So I know one of the issues was fact that under Section 35, and the sheriff has said several times that the sheriff's department is used as a de facto, trained professional officers are used as de facto Uber drivers. So what I have to say about that, if that's the case, that your officers or your department is being used as de facto Uber drivers, and you're not giving the information that you're needing to contact families, why have there not been any advocacy for change? That means the system needs to be changed. It means that if people in Section 35, you get the stakeholders at the table and you talk about how do we change that system so that your officers or you are no longer responsible when something like that happens. And as far as I know, there has been no change.
Thank you. Seth Daniels, do you have a question from the category? No? Sorry.
I have another mental health.
Go ahead.
On the topic of mental health, it is estimated by the American Psychological Association that 50% of those incarcerated in local or state jails and prisons report mental health concerns and that they are worse afterwards. Incarceration, as we all know, can bring out new issues and make existing ones worse. Oftentimes when people who are incarcerated are returned to the community, there are several steps that they must go through before they get there, but then once they're in the community, many report being kind of alone. There are some programs that address this. Do you feel like the Sheriff's Department should take this on? Or do you think that this is a third-party provider situation where you can work with partners to take care of it? So something in-house or outside of it?
Well,
A minute and a half.
it's all the above. While they're in our care, we have to work with them as much as we can by implementing cognitive behavioral therapy, by making sure individuals have housing when they leave our facility, because individuals with mental health issues, homelessness is a trigger. So we have to work, and we have to work at substance use disorder, we have to tackle education, we have to tackle mental health issues, and we have to tackle homelessness if we want to make sure people are successful when they come back to the community, which means leveraging our relationships with agencies for continuum of care so that people are coming back and have been successful.
Thank you. Sheriff Thompson, in 1 minute.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we do that. We do work with our external partners. But once they leave, it's up. Sorry, hello, can you hear me? Let's start that again.
I'm sorry? You're all set?
It's Russell said, yep. Yes, we do work with our external external partners. We try to establish those relationships before they leave us so that they can have that continual care. In the absence of that, untoward things can happen to them, but once they leave us, they are no longer under our jurisdiction. We are not mandated to do anything with them because we don't have jurisdiction over them. That said, this is not your grandfather's correction facility anymore. I do agree with Sandy. We have to do everything we possibly can to strengthen people while they're with us, and we're doing that. But on average, men are with us 12 to 14 months, ladies are with us 6 to 9 months. And so once they leave, we don't have a long time with them. So once they leave, hopefully they will get the care that they need. We have tried to put them in place with agencies that can help. But as I maintain, once they've left us, they're out of our care.
Thank you. Do you have another question in another category?
Sure, I have one more on just mass and CAS in general. I've heard that drug dealers prey on folks coming out of the prison as they're discharged, out of the jail as they're discharged. What is there to be done about that? And you can both protect people coming out and also just stop that from being proper purpose.
Well, I think I go first now? Okay. So it's not that they just prey on people as they're coming out of our facility. They are there. They are there. They have a ready clientele there. And so it's not just the people that are leaving our facility, it's the people that are living on Madison CAS. Now, we've talked to the Boston Police. There again, we don't have jurisdiction over those streets. Part of them is the Boston Police. Part of it is the state police. Now, we have patrol cars out there. We have offered help to both the city and the state. But we don't, although we do have policing powers, we do not arrest. And so we've talked to the police about at least arrest the pushers. Not necessarily the people that are using, but arrest the pushers. That again is on them. We cannot dictate to them what to do, but it's an incredibly pathetic situation that you can have BPD here, drug dealers selling their wares here, and there's no intervention. We cannot do anything about that because these are not our streets to patrol. So we've talked about that. I believe Mayor Wu and her team are looking at ways in which they can remedy that. But yes, we have an open air drug market that is outrageously out of control. And that's why I go back to the fact that what we try to do with Madison CAS is to at least get some of these people off the street, get them into shelter, so that they wouldn't be preyed upon by these individuals outside of a facility. So that's what we tried to do, and it wasn't successful.
All right, Sandy, you have 1 minute.
So, although it's outside of our mandate, currently it's about $70,000 a year to incarcerate somebody, not including the arrest, not including the going through the whole legal process. So it's imperative on the Sheriff's Department to make sure we develop those relationships when people are coming out of our facility. We have managed to establish relationships with law enforcement agencies for arrests to make sure that people are, but we're not leveraging our relationships on the other end, although neither one of them are our mandate. Our mandate is why you're incarcerated. So if we know what we're putting into individuals, so we should be investing more and building more relationships so that individuals come out, whether we have an organization, we have a sponsor or a mentor, to get that person right out of that area to where they need to go.
Thank you so much. Before we go to our questions from the board committees, do you have one more master task that you'd like to go to?
Yeah, I get on. There are a number of providers around you. You guys are in the new market. One of the larger entities there. There are a number of providers. Let's say, I know that there are 700 people a day that come to a couple of the clinics there. I visited one of them, and they have a lot of people that come in and come out. Would you support decentralizing all these services, or maybe some of your neighbors who are there? I mean, I know they want to expand. Maybe they need to go elsewhere. Would you support them no longer being in the market area, or would you oppose them?
I would support decentralization of some of the programs. Like I said earlier, Boston cannot bear all of it on their own. There are other cities and towns, they need to use their resources too. Our babies in our community can't even use their local parks, although we live in congested areas. It needs to be a team effort, it needs to be decentralized, and everyone needs to come to the table and for this crisis so that not one city or town is being restricted by it.
We fought mightily to at least have 2 of those clinics not open on Bradford Street in our catchment area. In our main catchment area, we have 3 methadone clinics, 3. People are not just being told from other parts of the state to come to Boston now, people are told from other states to come to Massachusetts now for their medication, so to speak. And so, yes, we think that these should be moved further apart. They shouldn't all be in a concentrated area like that. I agree with what United States Attorney Rachel Holmes is trying to do by saying that keeping the bridge closed is a health situation. These people they have serious health issues. And if you look at it as a health situation, hopefully we can get that bridge back in place so that people can get back to the island where they do have numerous facilities now. It's been closed for a while, and so a lot of them have fallen into disrepair. They have to be shored up. But they have to get these centers, these methadone clinics, outside of such a constricted area with so many of them right there, right on our doorstep.
Very good. I'd like to thank our candidates for responding openly and honestly to all of the questions that have been posed by our panelists. We're going to give each of them 1 minute for a closing comment. Sheriff Tompkins, we'll start with you.
Yes, so listen, once again, I thank you for having us here. The situation that we are looking at is this. In 1619, slavery began. In 1865, it ended, 2.5 centuries later. They closed down that oppressive system and started another one called the penal system. There's too much oppression, there's too much degradation, there's too much humiliation, particularly for black and brown people. It's not just on the sheriff's department, it's us as a collective to say enough is enough, to raise our voices, to say that we cannot keep on treating our citizens the way that they are being treated. It is ridiculous that we have this many of our citizens incarcerated. We are losing significant mental prowess. So as sheriff, I'm going to continue to work with individuals that are with us to help get them back on their feet, continue to work with their families so that the families are strengthened. You have strong families, you have strong communities. My name is Steve Tompkins. I am the sheriff, and I humbly ask for your vote to remain in that position.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having this forum this evening. Now more than ever, we need a sheriff that's going to step outside their mandate and be proactive, be vocal, be progressive, and implement the change that's needed for the community and for the people we serve at the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department. We can no longer say that's not our mandate. We have to make change. As your leader, I will be present at the Sheriff's Department. I will be present in the community. I will be innovative and holistic to make sure we have the programs that we need so individuals are coming back to the community and being successful. We must move away from the mindset of incarceration. We must move away from the mindset of criminalizing things. We have to look at diversionary programs, but we have to speak about why are we continually talking about second chances. This is not a race that's going to be won by endorsements. It's not a race that's going to be won by my opponent depositing money into his account so he can have more. Nor is it going to be, nor is it going to be won by asking his employees for donations. Thank you.
Part 2. Thank you to our candidates for Suffolk County Sheriff.
Probably could, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to part 203 of our debate this evening. Welcome to the second debate of the evening for Suffolk County District Attorney. Please help me welcome back to the stage our panelists from the Boston Herald, Sean Phillips Cotter, and from the Dorchester Recorder, Seth Daniel. And joining us for the first time today, political reporter and Massachusetts Playbook author Lisa Kozinski, former politics and general assignment reporter for the Boston Herald, the Eagle Tribune, and Gatehouse Media. She is a graduate of the Boston University with a dual degree in journalism and psychology. I want to thank the panelists for joining us this evening. And just a reminder that all of the candidates have already been given the debate ground rules. Now that we know how we're going to move forward this evening, please help me welcome the Suffolk County District Attorney candidates. Suffolk County District Attorney Kevin Hayden. You join us on stage. Before becoming acting district attorney, Kevin Hayden led the state sex offender registry board. Mr. Hayden served as the board's chairman for 6 years after serving as acting executive director and general counsel. Prior to that, Mr. Hayden spent 5 years as a criminal defense attorney. He served as a bar advocate for the Committee for Public Counsel Services, representing indigent clients in Boston Municipal Court and Boston Juvenile Court. Mr. Hayden began his career in the Suffolk County DA's office. He served as an assistant district attorney for over a decade across various units and was chief of the Safe Neighborhood, the gang unit, the homicide response team, and the juvenile unit. Mr. Hayden received his bachelor's degree from Dartmouth College in 1990 and his law degree from Boston University School of Law in 1995. He lives in Roslindale with his wife and 2 children. Next, please welcome City of Boston District City Councilor Ricardo Arroyo. Before becoming Boston City Councilor, where he sponsored the Surveillance Oversight Ordinance, the Facial Recognition Ban, and the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency, Mr. Arroyo acted as a public defender in Boston. He attended Boston Public Schools, holds a BA in History from the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, and a JD from Loyola University in Chicago. All right, now, to begin. And before we begin the questionings, I'd like to acknowledge City Councilor at Large, Julia Mejia. And also City Councilor at Large, Ruth Z. Eugene. Since this is about mass and class, we are going to what happens, you get in trouble. If you start naming one and you miss somebody, then you're in trouble. Let's give Tanya a shout out. Since it's about mass and caste, we're going to ask each of our candidates for Suffolk County District Attorney to give us a 3-minute opening statement. What would you do about the situation at Mass and Caste? We'll start first with Suffolk County District Attorney Kevin Hayden, and again, timekeeper out front, you have 3 minutes. Kevin.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see you. One of the things I would say at the outset, I think generally speaking, the way to address the problem, it has to be a regional approach. It has to be a multidisciplinary approach, and it also has to be an approach that involves decentralization. What I will do is premised in large part on some things that I've already done in the short amount of time since I've taken office. Criminalizing addiction, we all know, just doesn't work. So what I did shortly after I took office was take asset forfeiture money, about $450,000, and invested it right back into our opioid crisis in a program called Services Over Sentences that provides robust alternatives to prosecution for those who are suffering from addiction problems and mental health problems. The North Suffolk Mental Health Association is one of very few that actually is equipped to deal with both mental health issues and substance use disorder, and to provide real options, real treatment, and real opportunities to get services that are needed to break free from cycles of addiction. So we have offered that. We offered it countywide, but we have focused it on Mass and Cass, and so that is one of the things that we did very early on in my tenure. On the flip side, and I think it's important to note that we do have vulnerable people that are down there that are suffering from homelessness, suffering from substance use disorder, suffering from mental health issues. They're vulnerable, and they're being preyed upon, and I think we can never forget that. We also have an entire business community and people that live there that are also vastly affected by this crisis. And it's a humanitarian crisis. It's a human tragedy that's going on down there in that Mass and Cass area. So what we've also focused on and committed to is having a zero tolerance with regards to predators. So those who are preying on them, those who are engaging in human trafficking, those who are selling the drugs, those who are distributing the drugs, we will hold them accountable. And we have to separate those two issues from each other. It's very important to do that. We've added a continuity of case management by having a point prosecutor in every district court assigned to handle all the cases that are coming out of Mass and Cass. We've been instituting uniform stay-away orders that the courts are very much in agreement with and have been imposing. And we already have a strategic plan to expand our SOS program into the future, not just in terms of in the future years, but also in terms increased services, more people that we can offer that program to. So those things that I've done are the things that we will continue to do.
Thank you, Kevin. Councilor Arroyo, would you like to take 1 minute to respond to something Kevin said before you start your 3-minute statement? Thank you. Okay.
There we go. So Madison has been an intractable problem for almost a decade now because of the confluence of so many different issues that are there. You have people who are struggling with substance use disorder, people who are homeless, you have people who are preying on those individuals. In some cases, you have people who are suffering both substance use disorder, mental health illness, and are also part of the folks that are causing violence and or preying in that space. And so the confluence of all of those different things requires a coordinated response amongst a bunch of different branches of government. What I would say I have been a large proponent of, what I believe is the most effective thing we can do, is housing first. There's a program called Heading Home that exists that has been able to work with folks in providing housing first. What housing first means is low threshold housing. It means that before you are into, we put you in a drug rehabilitation program, before we put you into mental health treatment, we are providing you with housing so that we can stabilize your living situation so that that treatment can take. It's incredibly important that we do that. The city has already begun that step, and I think we have 800 more properties throughout the city of housing that we are working on in the pipeline to come online in the next year or so that we can get people into housing. The other thing I would say about this is coercive rehabilitation does not work. I've never seen it work. I'm the only person on this stage who has ever represented someone who has lived on Madison Cass as a public defender. And what I will tell you is when you do this work, when you try to rehabilitate folks at the threat of jail or a conviction, it is incredibly ineffective. What ends up happening is you show up for a program like the program that my opponent has mentioned, where you show up and they say, would you like to go to jail today, or would you like to go to rehabilitation? And the answer is always rehabilitation, because nobody says jail. And so they say it's voluntary. And then they go and they say, okay, well, the program is actually full. So if we want to get you beds, we don't have beds for rehabilitation, we don't have beds for mental health, and we certainly don't have, unfortunately, beds for both, for dual diagnosis. And so what ends up happening is you end up on a waiting list at the jail. And then when that waiting list is fulfilled, then you get to go to a rehabilitation center. And what ends up happening is you create a backlog within our prisons with that. This is what I experienced in Essex County. And what actually happens is that often those individuals are now 2 or 3 times more likely to overdose. They are now much more likely to have trauma. And when you create a situation where they are on probation and they are based on conditions, and they violate those conditions, which by the way, violation of those conditions could mean that they missed an appointment to a rehabilitation center, instead of saying, which is common, by the way, when you are dealing with folks who are dealing with these kinds of problems, where you're dealing with mental health treatment and or addiction, what ends up happening is rather than coming forward to the people who are helping them, the people who have structured all of these sort of pathways out, they're afraid of jail, they're afraid of being punished, and so they actually end up having warrants created, and all of it is wildly costly and ineffective.
Thank you. According to our rules, Kevin, would you like to take 1 minute to respond to something Councilor Arroyo has just said?
I would, thank you. There's nothing coercive about services that we are offering through services over sentences. The expansion of the program extends to people who have been arraigned, but is also offered and available for people who choose not to arraign. We choose to offer services before their arraignment, but there are people within the system that do end up getting arraigned. It is entirely voluntary. If it wasn't entirely voluntary, we would see more people. So we've had since we started in June, once we got off the ground with the structures, we've had 13 people apply. We've had 8 that are actively engaged. If we were coercively forcing this on people, we would have many, many more people in services over sentences, and that fact we would have more than we could handle. It's entirely voluntary, and it works.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to our questions from our panelists. And our first question is about qualified immunity, and it will come from Politico's Lisa Kozinski.
Okay. So the question is really very simple.
There you go.
So the question is very simple. Do you support ending qualified immunity in violence?
Sure.
And I think Kevin Hayden will have the opportunity to respond, then
I'm first, right?
yes.
Okay. No, I don't support ending qualified immunity. But by the same token, by no means whatsoever do I not support holding police officers and public officials accountable when they commit crimes of wrongdoing. And the two are really separate in a lot of ways. Qualified immunity is judicially created through a progeny of case law. It's very confusing. It's not codified by our legislature. And so to change it is not easy. It's also, it shields all public officials from civil liability. It does nothing to protect a police officer or any other public official that engages in wrongdoing from criminal responsibility. And to that point, with regards to police officers in particular, if they violate the civil rights of a person who they engage with, and there's an accusation of that violation of civil rights that's proven, they lose that right to that immunity. So I will hold any police officer or public official accountable for crimes that they are committing, and nothing about immunity will protect them from that. And that I stand behind firmly, and will always do.
Thank you. We'll have 1 minute to respond to that from
Thank you. Yes, I support ending qualified immunity. I worked on an op-ed with our Congressman Leanna Presley in support of ending qualified immunity. You can read that in the Boston Globe. I'm honored by her endorsement, and I think part of that process, frankly, is because qualified immunity has shielded Black and brown families from justice it's not that complicated at all. Police are twice as likely to use force against people of color. Black and brown people are 3 times more likely to die at the hands of a white officer. And when you cannot hold officers accountable civilly, then it doesn't create a disincentive for those kinds of abuses. When the I'll give you one example. We just hired a police commissioner who was brutalized in 1995. The officer who brutalized him was fired for that brutalization. It cost the city of Boston $1.4 million in a federal suit. He got rehired because of arbitration, came back, did it again. He actually brutalized somebody in the North End, cost the city another $1.4 million. He currently serves under that police commissioner, even though he was fired twice. Qualified immunity gets to the root of that.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is about sexual exploitation of women and children, and it will come from Boston Herald's Phillips Cotter.
Does this microphone work? Yes, it does. As I think both of you mentioned, human trafficking is a very significant issue in the Madison Cass area in particular. I am looking to see how you think both the DA's office and law enforcement in general can be more proactive in getting ahead of that and cutting down on that.
Yes, City Councilor first.
Thank you. So I think we need to prosecute to the full extent of the law in the moments where we are able to put forward a case on sex trafficking or that kind of abuse. But I would also note that often when these, and it's generally men, when these men are generally preying on women and children, they're preying on vulnerable people who often have underlying conditions and underlying issues that we should be addressing at its root. And part of that gets the prevention of their ability to target and violate these women and men when it's that. But I would prosecute that. We have an office. The bureau at the office right now is the Family Protection and Sexual Assault Bureau. That's job it is to work on this. Another issue that I think is really, really important for this is that sexual harm comes with a stigma, still, unfortunately. And that stigma makes it very difficult for people to report or come forward. And we need to make sure that we are creating with our victim witness advocates, with our ADAs, a culture of sensitivity and understanding to what they're addressing and the traumas that they're addressing there when we are working with survivors and their families. That's incredibly essential to making sure that we are making a pathway where other people are willing to come forward and seek the assistance and the help that they need.
Yes, human trafficking is certainly a situation that has gained a lot more notice over the years. It's something that's very important to me and that I have a lot of experience with based upon my years of managing the Sex Offender Registry Board. And, you know, and one of the things I think is important to note about human trafficking is it's in many ways not much different than other sexual assaults. Some people I think tend to think it is, it's really not. It is, it's dark, it's insidious, it's easily hidden. Victims almost always and frequently don't want to come forward. They're frequently traumatized over extensive periods of time. There's shame, there's guilt, and there's trauma that goes along with it. And so it's very similar to other forms of sexual assault. The aspects of it that make it not as always as easy to prosecute. People don't always want to come forward. People may not come forward until late. But in any event, you want to make sure that you're treating that trauma even after the case is over. You want to make sure that you're providing continuing services for victims.
Thank you. Thank you. And next question is about public safety, ghost guns, and restorative justice. And it comes from Seth Daniels of the Dorchester Reporter.
Yeah, on the topic of ghost guns, we saw the emergence of the ghost gun factory on Columbia Road. The ghost gun is a firearm that's put together for a 3D printer. We saw it this summer. It was shocking to a lot of people. These factories are dependent upon ordering gun parts online, giving them via trafficking in other ways. What can be done to stop such things like ghost gun factories? I feel like they are way ahead of both the law and law enforcement.
Kevin Hayden, you have a minute and a half to respond.
So yes, you know, the ghost guns are for sure a problem. They're not always untraceable. There are times, by the way, where ghost guns do have parts that are serialized and are therefore traceable. So with our Boston First program that is using the best in forensic technology to trace guns, if there's serialized parts within those guns, then we can at least track those parts. And that can aid us in assisting in following and tracking those guns. But there's really, there's two key areas of legislation that really need to take place, and they've both been proffered. I don't think either of them are in place yet, unfortunately. And it all goes down to the stricter gun laws that make it harder to carry an illegal firearm anyway. And one is the license to carry. You should have to have a license to carry in order to get the parts for the guns that you're making. That's an important aspect. And then there is also legislation which is not yet in place, but would require serialization of those parts. With that, if you have those two things in place, it can help to make a difference. It's still going to be in the city's problem. Tracking and tracing these guns is definitely an issue. But if we can get legislation that allows for the serialization of the parts, and if we can make it a requirement to have a license to carry just to get the parts in and of themselves, those are two things that will make a difference.
Thank you. Ricardo Arroyo,
I would agree with the serialization is incredibly important so that we can track those pieces and parts. One of the other aspects that legislation can take care of is making sure that those parts have to be detectable by metal detectors so that they can essentially move through metal detection. And the other piece of this is that a ghost gun tends to be created with machine-made pieces and pieces that you can create out of the 3D printer. And we should be able to track who is purchasing those pieces, when they're purchasing those pieces. All of that should be trackable or traceable. All of that should be done through legislation. I know there's a bill at the House to do that right now. The federal government is also looking at doing things through Joe Biden. But what I would also say is the vast majority of gun crimes on our streets are done with non-ghost guns. They're done with guns that are being trafficked into our cities through other states that have very poor legal protections against that. And so one of the things I would say is we have to really focus on how these guns are reaching our neighborhoods. Most of our neighborhoods do not have gun factories. That's not how they're getting there. And so we have to do our job in terms of incarcerating and really investigating those traffickers.
The next question is about alternatives to prosecution and incarceration. And it will come from Political's Lisa Kozinski.
So a major issue in this race has been Rachel Roman's decline to prosecute list. I want to break that down a bit and kind of dig into that. What, on that list is a priority of yours to find alternatives to prosecution for, and what's not on that list that is a priority to find alternatives to prosecution for?
Councilor Arroyo, you can respond first.
Yeah, so I helped write that list when I was a public defender. Rachel Rollins convened during her campaign a room of people who had been impacted by our criminal justice system and came up with things that we could implement that would deal with racial and class disparity pretty much immediately. And this is what came out of that. The list of 15 has been a success. I mean, you don't have to take my word for it. There's been multiple studies on this. The Boston Globe has reported on this. Commonwealth Magazine has reported on this. If you have your case diverted, you are 64% less likely to come back to our court system with a misdemeanor charge, 74% less likely to show up with a felony. It's incredibly important at addressing racial disparity. The way it works when you get rid of this, you clap that list. The way it works when you get rid of that list, though, is that people go back to the biases and the status quo of how we've always done this. There's nothing new about not having a list. That's how every district attorney has always done it. And what that has done is create decades and decades of racial and class disparity, has led to mass incarceration, because the reality is that building does not look like this room. That building looks very different. And when people are making charging decisions without having to go to a supervisor first and say, I want to charge this lower level offense, and have to give a reason and a basis for why they're going to do that, when you don't put a check on that, then those micro biases, that subconscious or overt racism, if it exists, shows up in the ways that we do sentencing. And so removing this list is incredibly harmful for our communities. It actually has a negative causal impact. When we see the actual list that has happened and has been put in place, that reduces crime.
1 minute to respond. Hayden.
So this is my 1 minute response, not my
Yes.
first response. So
1 minute to this, yes.
Sure. So what I would say to that is that it is, from my perspective, there's not a single charge on that list that is not appropriate for an alternative prosecution. They all are, and there are some others that may be as well. The difference for me is that I believe that the focus of what to prosecute and what not to prosecute should be on the person and the persons involved in the case. So every case has someone who's accused, every case, there's no such thing as a victimless crime, so we have victims in every case, we have a community that's affected in every case, and we need to focus on all those things and on the person involved and the needs of that person in order to figure out what the best alternatives of prosecution are. Not prosecuting someone in and of itself without doing anything else whatsoever is not an alternative to prosecution.
So I agree with
Which is prevention and intervention, and it will come from Boston Herald, Phillips, Cotter.
Let's talk police funding. Should the budget of the Boston Police Department be cut down? How much? And what should happen with the allocation of police resources?
And Kevin Hayden, you respond first, a minute and a half.
Sure, I don't think I got a chance to respond fully to the other question, but that's,
I think you used your time.
I don't believe that the police should be defunded. I think that the soon-to-be new commissioner, or now new commissioner, Michael Kotter, said it best, is he's never seen anything that has a problem that needs to be addressed, or an institution or an agency needs to be addressed, get better by losing funding and by being defunded. And so I don't think defunding is the answer. Now, if you want to earmark or allocate funding for certain things, for community policing, for giving back into the community, for an allocation of resources, for integrity review, and things of the like that the police department can, should, or must do with the funding, I think that's perfectly okay. But just to defund them, I don't think is an answer or a solution. I agree with Michael Kotter. I don't think that's ever helped.
All right.
So, to answer that, I've led on both budget cycles to reallocate that funding. And the reason for that is we know, you don't have to take my word for it, you can take the word of the indictments that have happened. that this is a system that has had rampant overtime fraud repeatedly over the course of the last few decades. And if you're talking about using money correctly, there was an audit done in 2015 by the Boston Police Department and Marty Walsh that found that when you added more officers, it didn't actually decrease overtime, it actually increased overtime. And that's because the way that they manage personnel is incredibly problematic. And so when we talk about resources, I know that the root of crime, the root of behaviors that we don't want to see, come from poverty, they come from trauma, they come from the lack of programs. And unless you fund those things that lead to public safety, you will not receive public safety. We talked about Mass and Cass. Over the last 5 years, we've spent $20 million on police overtime in Mass and Cass, $20 million. That could have gone to rehabilitation centers like the treatment centers, and that would have
Justice, and the question will come from Dorchester reporter Seth Daniels.
On juvenile justice, exactly. Clearly, in the city neighborhood, young people don't get the same breaks as those young people in suburban areas. Right. Many are not well represented legally or don't even know what to do once they get to court. Divergent policies have shown to perhaps give those kinds of second chances to young people in the city. What is the right balance, though, of giving juveniles this second chance and not giving them free pass to wreak havoc on the neighborhoods?
Is this for me?
Yes, Ricardo.
Yeah, so what I would say is I was led to public defense because of what I saw happen to juveniles when I was growing up in Boston Public Schools, and what I saw in my own life and experiences in terms of racial profiling and the way in which we do this. One of the major differences between me and my opponent is that I don't support the continuation of the gang database that racially profiles our children. What I would say about juvenile intervention and prevention, I remember talking to now U.S. Attorney Rachel Rollins about a year or so back, and she was telling me how alarmed she was that something like 95 to 98% of juvenile crimes that are charged or come through our system in Suffolk County are black and brown children. Yet, in our diversion programs, they're only around 70%. You do the math on that. And so, when we talk about giving our children opportunities to not allow criminal records when they're juveniles, or the trauma in which they are experienced as juveniles impact the rest of their life, I am very, very dedicated to this work, which means I have been a full supporter of raising the age so that it follows the science. And I also believe, to my core, that what children in trauma need isn't more trauma. I'm not for kids in cages. There was a story in the Boston Herald, Sean Cotter, you might be one of the people who wrote it, about the children in downtown Crossing. They're 13 years old. One of those children was charged with 14 counts, more counts than they've been alive, and a $5,000 bail. I firmly believe that the best way to reach those children is not through charging, not through bail, but through programs and services.
All right, we have another Mass and Cass question in here, come from Lisa. I'm sorry, you're right. 1 minute, Kevin Hayden, follow up. Thank you.
A topic's very close to my heart, having done juvenile work as both a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. Many young man at Youth Options Unlimited, when I started on the board there, and he said, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "No," and he said, he told me where he's from, he was a victim in the case I had, and he thanked me, he said, "You saved my life." He said, I was a victim in the case, but I could have easily gone the other way, and I was heading in the wrong direction. But I didn't because of you. But, juvenile, it's vitally, vitally important that we cut off that pipeline of prison at a juvenile standpoint. And what we do at juvenile alternative resolution programs has been enormously successful. 80%, 85% of the people that participate in it complete it, and 75% of them that complete it will not recidivate with the first year. And they do that by avoiding getting any criminal entry on their record whatsoever, because we are diverting those cases and not prosecuting them when they go through that program.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, another Mass and Cass question here on the rundown to come from Lisa Kozinski.
So, the homelessness and addiction, sorry, go homelessness and addiction crises at Madison Cass are not just a city issue. So how would you work with the incoming governor and state lawmakers to really affect change in this area?
Kevin Hayden, a minute and a half to respond.
Sure, I think we need to work with our governor, with our attorney generals, with all of our legislators on a regional level. Because the reality is that it is not a Boston problem. It's not a Boston problem in terms of residency. It's not a Boston problem in terms of the people that are even down there now. There are so many people that are down there that are coming from elsewhere. And so we need everyone from around our state to help with that. You know, the things that I've done so far, I would note, I think are important in terms of what we've done and what we will continue to do. My counselor here, city councilor, was been there for 3 years, 2 years as the head of public health, and had one public hearing during the course of 2 years as the head of public health. That's not enough. We need to engage with our legislators, we need to engage with our governors, we need to engage with our attorney general to do a regional approach that is focused on decentralization and focused on a multidisciplinary approach to not only address the human problem here and the health problem here, but also the public safety issue that's running rampant now.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is very much a regional approach, but my biggest push on this is for resources to decentralization. One of the things that I have made very clear to this administration as we look for housing, as we look for alternatives to housing, is that I would like those units to be accessible to my district. If other people are standing in the way of those things, I have actually opened up the door so that we can create that housing, because one of the things that bothers me immensely is that we otherize these individuals. They are here right now. They deserve care. They deserve respect. They deserve to be treated as human beings. And what often happens is people say, that's not our problem. You got to send them somewhere else. You got to send them over here. I've made clear to this administration that I'm open to that housing being in my district. And as district attorney, I would push with our federal government and our state government to ensure that we are creating housing opportunities for individuals, that we're creating the funding. Because frankly, for as long as I've been a public defender, the issue has been the same. We don't have resources for beds. We don't have we don't have options for that. And when you create two separate health systems for people who are poor and people who have access to resources, you're going to get these kinds of results.
Thank you. And our last question before closing announcement section is about the war on drugs from the Boston Herald's Phillips Cotter.
So how would you balance the call to prosecute people who are dealing drugs in Madison Cass versus the call to not overly penalize people who are suffering from substance use disorder? Where do you find that middle ground, and how do you balance those things?
That question from Sean Phillips Cotter.
Thank you.
Yes, and you respond first, because we have a minute and a half.
Thank you. And so the war on drugs has been an abject failure by every standard. It's one of the reasons why I support. It's one of the reasons I support ending mandatory minimums. That's another place the difference between me and my opponent, who supports keeping in place mandatory minimums that have really devastated our communities. I support ending them. But one of the things that you have to do here is understand that there's no, to me at least, there's no separation between providing care for people who are vulnerable, for people who are seeking services or in need of services, while also incarcerating those that are harming them or causing them harm. I don't see a separation between those two. I think you can do those things at the same time. One of the things that I would just make clear is when we talk about the war on drugs, what often happens is that the way in which it's policed and the way in which it's enforced and the way in which it's charged falls harder on Black and brown communities, falls harder on people in poverty, and that creates problems when we're talking about pathways out and pathways to being better citizens and residents of our communities. And one of the ways in which that manifests itself is that when you have charges for drug distribution or drug dealing, what ends up happening is you actually become unable to take federal student loans. You no longer can take student loans. And so when those charges happen younger in someone's life, you're actually shutting off pathways for them to receive the services and the help they need in the future. And so one of the things I would do is not call it a war on drugs anymore, but make sure that we're focusing on communities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, I don't, when I look at our current situation, I don't think about the war on drugs. When I think about the war on drugs, I think about late 80s and early 90s, and when there was over-prosecution and racially disparate treatment of black people and brown people with regards to the drug laws back then. I think if you look at a situation like Madison right now, there absolutely positively is a difference. There are vulnerable people who are suffering from substance abuse disorder down there, who are homeless, who have mental health issues, and there are people who are coming into Madison to sell and distribute drugs to those people and prey on those vulnerable people. There is a difference, and they need to be treated differently. If we don't face that reality, and face the reality that we have a public safety problem down in Madison in addition to a public health problem, then we're going to continue to have the problem we have. We cannot continue to enable what's going on down there. So the people that are dealing with drugs and trafficking need to be dealt with.
Closing comments.
Sure. And I've said this many times, I truly and firmly believe that public safety and criminal legal reform are simply not mutually exclusive. Both can and must be achieved. All of our communities, particularly our black and brown communities, absolutely positively demand both. The notion that one should sacrifice to the altar the other is simply not true and simply not necessary. What my administration will do and continue to adhere to is a comprehensive view of the criminal legal system that addresses criminal legal reform in a way that goes beyond diversion, deals with intervention and prevention strategies in close collaboration with our community partners. That's another important part we've gotten away from what we need to deal with. And also deals with returning citizens that are coming back into our community. They need to come back in whole, they need to come back and restored, they need to come back with access to opportunity.
Thank you.
We're doing all those things.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. And 1 minute closing remarks from
Thank you to everybody for putting this on today and for your participation. The work of justice has been something that I have believed in since I was a child, watching my father do the work he has done, watching my mother as a teacher. What I understand firmly is that our systems were not built for us. They were largely built to harm or oppress us. And if we're going to do the work of making those systems work for us, we have to continue to do the work that has been done in the last 3 years. I've been a Boston resident my whole life, except for when I went away for school, and I can tell you directly that we've never had a DA or a district attorney who I felt saw our communities and tried to do the work of our communities more than Rachel Rollins did in the last 3 years. We can't go backwards. My opponent has dismantled a number of policies that she has put in place, a number of things that create systemic change. He can shake his head no next to me, but he dismantled the list of 15. And so when we talk about this work, it's incredibly important that we continue to build upon the progress that she's made with systemic changes. Thank you.
Arroyo, thank you for your
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. We have everyone attention for a moment. We have everyone's attention for a moment. Can I have everyone's attention for a moment? That means please stop crying. We're going to now pray for the food. So we have not eaten, and I've got the question of whether we eat. Everyone, can we please now, excuse me, everyone in the back. We will now pray for the food. Lord, pray to the Lord now, Father, we honor this time. Thank you, Lord, for giving this moment of confidence, Lord. Excuse me, Lord. Excuse me, Lord. Excuse me, Lord. Can we now pray for the food? Can we now pray for the food? Can we now pray for the food? Let us pray. Lord, I do most God, Father, in the name of this faithful conversation. Thank you, Lord, for giving us peace and allowing us to come together. We ask out that you continue to be with us as we fellowship this evening and that the food nourishes our hearts. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. So can you please now grab the food before we begin with the next phase? That would be appreciated. Thank you very much. If you get your seats and conversations, all right?
What's up, sis? Good, good. How you doing? Good to meet you. Good to meet you. I learned everything from her.
Can I ask the people in the back to please find their seats?
All right. Right here?
All right, I'm going to start calling you out by name. Out by name. Well, since those who are talking aren't interested, we're going to start the program in any event. So, Karen, back to you.
All right, everybody, please find a seat. All right. Please find a seat. I have one thing to say before we get started. Somebody send me a plate. All right, ladies and gentlemen, those in the back who are at the food table and in the beverage, please keep your voices down. Welcome to the third debate of the evening for State Senate for the 2nd Suffolk District. Please help me in welcoming back already on the stage our distinguished panelists for this evening. From the Boston Herald, reporter Phillips Cotter. From the Dorchester Reporter, Seth Daniel. And from Politico, Lisa Kozinski. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. We'll give a round of applause to our panelists. Just a reminder that all the debate ground rules have already been shared with our candidates. And so we know how we're moving forward this evening. Please help me in welcoming the 2nd Suffolk District State Senate candidates. I will read a little bit about each of them. State Representative Nita Eligardo. Nita began her professional career at the National Consumer Law Center in Boston, managing the Foreclosure Prevention Project. She later worked as Jamaica County Liaison and Senior to Massachusetts, Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, before becoming state representative in 2019. Ms. Elgaro earned a scholarship to pursue studies at MIT, where she received a Bachelor of Science in Urban Studies and Planning. While at Boston University Law School, she interned at the State Senate, studying Massachusetts constitutional law and tax reform. Ms. Elgaro was a graduate of Harvard Student School of Government, where she studied political advocacy and leadership, and she lives with her husband in Jamaica Plain. Next, State Representative Liz Miranda. Before serving in the Massachusetts legislature, Liz Miranda was a nonprofit executive, entrepreneur, and community organizer. She got her start as youth organizer in the Dudley Triangle. She served as the executive director of the Hawthorne Youth and Community Center and director of youth opportunity development at the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, also known as DSNI. Ms. Miranda is a Wellesley College alumna and graduate of Boston Public Schools, graduating from the John D. Next, former state senator, 2nd Suffolk District, Diane Wilkerson. Diane Wilkerson is the first African-American woman elected to the Massachusetts State Senate after graduating from Springfield High School of Commerce in 1973. Ms. Wilkerson attended the American International College, earning her B.S. degree in public administration in 1978. She attended Boston College Law School, earning her J.D. in 1981. Beginning her legal practice that same year, she clerked in the Massachusetts Appeals Court until 1982, when she left to become deputy counsel to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. In 1983, she joined the law firm of Lebeau, Lamb, Lurvie, and McCrae, where she remained until 1985. That year, Ms. Wilkerson became the assistant legal counsel to Governor Michael Dukakis. In 1987, she became the first African-American woman in Boston to become a partner in a major law firm, Roach, Cairns, and Jacksonville, where she practiced until being elected to the Massachusetts State Senate in 1992. She served until 2008, and Ms. Wilkerson resides in Dorchester. Next, Attorney Minyard Culpepper. Arts degree from Brandeis University and a law degree from Suffolk University Law School. He received his Master of Divinity degree from Howard University School of Divinity. After law school, Reverend Culpepper served as Chief of Staff to Congresswoman Barbara Rose Collins, the Democrat from Michigan. He also served as Staff Director to Councilmember John Ray, District of Columbia City Council. Mr. Culpepper was an attorney in private practice, specializing in labor law, housing, and personal injury law in Boston, raising his two sons, Minyard Jr. and Jonathan, both of whom practice law and are involved in faith work with their father at Pleasant Hill Missionary Church before becoming the New England Regional Counsel for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. He retired from HUD on February 25th, 2022. Next, meet community activist James Grant. James Grant has worked in law enforcement for over 20 years at the Department of Correction. He has served as a supervisor in the Security Department of the Division of Transitional Assistance, DTA, in Roxbury. As an educator, he's a certified middle and high school teacher in the Boston Public Schools and as a high school assistant principal. James is an ordained deacon at the historic 12th Baptist Church in Roxbury, where he has been an active member of the church for over 30 years. He's a published author. It's called Women Are Gods, and he holds a bachelor's degree from UMass Boston. Let's welcome all of our candidates. One more chair. James, are you here? statements. We're going to give each of our candidates 3 minutes. The question is, if you're elected, what will you do for the situation at Madison Cass? And we'll start with State Representative from the 7th District, Nita Eludarpo.
15 seconds. State Representative for 15 seconds.
15.
I feel Madison Cass personally, not just because I've been visiting there for the 10 years where we had the problem long before I became a state rep, but also because I grew up in a family where we had addictions and evictions. Both of my parents struggle with substance use disorder, and at the age of 30, I had to go get my dad out of the crack house. And we know that the epidemic was treated very differently, none of us Black people. And so when I visit, when I speak with people who are struggling with substance use disorder, I remember my father and mother who are now in recovery for 15 and 30 years respectively. And that is something that to get there. I'm very blessed to be in a district where we are housing 35 people that came from Madison Cass. When we talk about housing first, that's what it looks like. And when the residents first came, because they are residents, they are constituents, when they first came from Madison Cass where they were previously living, we knew that it was a public health issue, we knew that it was a housing issue, and we also experienced the public safety issues, which are the symptoms of the underlying problem. To solve that, we had to do what we're going to have to do statewide and across the city of Boston. We had to engage the community health centers. We had to engage both E2 and E13, all of the police that would be involved, and we had to engage Victory programs. If we invest in programs like Victory that have been having outcomes for over 45 years in addressing not only chronic homelessness and mental illness, but substance use disorder, it works. Because they came around and wrapped around services, not only around the people living in the hotel, but also around us in the community, so that when I took business walks, I could understand, okay, there are needles inside of our gas station, that's not been happening. And there are altercations happening on the corner of Huntington, that's not been happening in South Huntington. What are we gonna do about it that respects all of our residents, including those who are struggling? And these problems are well equipped. I've been trained myself as a volunteer over many years, and I've been an outcomes assessor for those same types of programs. And so when I move through the district, I'm not just thinking about the short-term needs, which we also need that relief immediately, but I'm thinking about the long-term needs. And so when we look across the city of Boston, and we find that housing inventory, we need it for a lot of purposes, but we need to set aside for this. We also need to make sure that the whole constellation of services that are needed health-wise are provided to these communities.
Thank you, Representative. Next, we'll hear from State Representative Liz Miranda for 3 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. The Madison Cass crisis for me is something very close to home. I live a block away and own a home in that community, and that's where I've been born and raised. And I've been one of the most consistent voices on this issue. Before I keep going, I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that there were people that have been working on this issue for 8 years. Some of them are in this room, including Domingos de Rosa, Yahaira Lopez, Marlon Naive Smith, and former State Representative Carlos Enriquez, who 8 years ago, maybe even longer, came to the community after seeing things happening in Clifford Park, aka the Prairie, to say that there was a looming crisis, and sadly, not many people listened. One of the major issues with the public health crisis of this magnitude and deep human suffering is that not everyone believes that it's their problem. Not everyone believes that it's their opportunity to ensure that people who are not only suffering from substance abuse disorder, but mental health crises, being unhoused and underhoused for well over 10 years, and folks actually returning back from incarceration with no safe place to go. And I have been on the Hill basically fighting that this is a problem for all the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. There's no corner of the state that is not represented at Madison Cass. Over 60 to 70% of the people on Madison Cass today, sometimes it swings from 150 to 400, are people from other cities and towns in Massachusetts, and other states in the country. And so it's important that we do this together with the city. I was proud in my first term to get $5 million along with Rep. John Santiago. And in my third year, getting $1 million for low threshold housing. Budget getting $500,000 to ensure that there is $250,000 at the Department of Mental Health specifically to deal with the mass and cash crisis. We cannot throw these people away. They need help. We cannot put them in jail because incarceration, as you can see what happened in the 80s and 90s in our Black community when no one came to help with the crack epidemic. So I'll continue to do what I've currently done, which is to continue to pass or try to file legislation. I just passed a recent piece of legislation that came out of committee on the decriminalization, of drugs, and it was voted favorably out of committee, and that's pretty rare for something so controversial. And also a bill on saturation. We who live in that community do not need more services in that square mile of mass and pass.
Thank you. Next, we'll have 3 minutes from State Senator Diane Wilkerson.
Good evening, everyone. So, the question is, what are we going to do about it? Exactly. And so let me get to that, because I think that Massachusetts is in a very unique position in that we have more money than we know what to do with. The city of Boston has more money than they know what to do with. They're looking for places to spend the money. The fundamental problem in how we're dealing with mass and cash is that it is about more than mass and cash. That's for one. Go to Nubian Square, you see the fallout. Go to the South End, you see the fallout. Go to the businesses over there, you see the fallout. And there are absolutely things we can do. Here's the problem. Number one, it can't be about Boston. This is an especially appropriate question to be asking people who are seeking to get elected to the state legislature, because that's where the money is. And part of this is going to require a whole reset, rethinking about how we think about addiction and how we allow other people to treat us as a community in addiction. Because the reality is that there might be a whole lot of fighting going on in the State House, but if you never heard it, this is like the tree in the forest question, right? The fact is that when other communities have addiction problems, they send the family van. When we have them, they send the bus, the feds bus, right? Our children can't play. Here's what we can do, because I could talk along about what the problems are. Thank you to the nation of FOI who have been in Nubian Square trying to make it walkable for us. But we're raising money to support what they're doing on our own. What's wrong with that picture? What's wrong with that picture? That is the job of the elected officials, to deliver the resources. And you're going to hear a lot of numbers, like the 5 million, all of the state electeds. You know, I know that Rep. Santiago filed a bill. I know he had support. Everybody's going to claim support for it, and I think it's important that we have it, but we need a whole lot more than that. The first piece, my first bit of advice and suggestion would be that we start with an assessment about where people lived before they got to mass and cash. And then keep going forward. If people have said about a Boston problem, but Boston has been owning that problem, and we never should have. Never should have. 60-something% of the people are from other communities. Those communities have to bear the burden. It's got to be more than the state stepping in. The governor came and said, we're going to build some houses. You know what that was? A no-bid contract, because somebody needed to build 30 small houses over in Chatham. Like that was enough, right? It happened so quick, no bid. The fact is we need resources. We have resources. We have a community of people who are policing that place and making sure that it is safe. But it is our state's collective responsibility and not the city.
Thank you very much. Attorney Minyard Culpepper.
Thank you for the question, Karen. In my work in the church and in the community, I've worked with addicts and those families that have suffered as a result of addiction for the last 26 years. I work with the loved ones, and I'm familiar with the cause and the consequences of addiction. You know, I fought for those that were addicted to get into housing, to have a path to healing. In the drug den at Madison Cass, the challenge that we have is one that we cannot tolerate and allow it to engulf an entire neighborhood. There are things that we need to do on Beacon Hill, and we need to do it now. We can't wait any longer. The reason why I'm running for the state senate is I'm running for the state senate to go to the state senate and to make good trouble, because when you make good trouble, you get good results. We need to set aside some money, and we need to focus on Madison Cass in a way that is intentional. We need to look at exactly what happened. The solution is not simple, and there is no simple solution or a single solution. But I believe that the continuum of care that has provided comprehensive addiction recovery, mental health counseling, housing, education, training, and placement. I believe that's the only proven solution to healing the addict. And when we heal the addict, we begin to heal the community. And this is not just a Boston problem. We need to look at where folks are coming from. They need to participate in paying for this. They're coming from outside of Boston. They're coming from New Hampshire. They're coming from Rhode Island. And so we need to have a solution when everyone that is coming to Madison Cass to get high, everyone from those different communities need to participate in the solution, and they need to put up, and they need to put up, and they need to put up and shut up, because this is not just a Boston problem. And when we look at what happens at Madison Cass, it's not just Madison Cass. We have a group that every week they're in Trotter Park, an AA group that we work with. In the winter, they're in the church, an AA group. And we understand that when we work with them, when we sit with them, when we talk with them, when we facilitate with them, when we pray with them, when we love them, we get good results. And I believe that as a community, we can all come together. I tell you, I'm going to Beacon Hill, and I'm going to Beacon Hill to make good trouble. When we make good trouble, we get good results.
Thank you. I'm going to check and make sure, find out community activist James Grant is here before we move on to our questions. And we are now going to move into the part of our conversation where we are going to have panelist questions. No responses to the opening statements. Our first question about public health equity is going to come from Politico's Lisa Kozinski.
Hey. The pandemic, of course, has exacerbated existing disparities in access to and equity in public health. The state has put millions behind closing vaccine equity gaps, but that's only part of the problem. So, if elected, what legislation would you put forward to increase health equity and access? And is there anything you would change in what the state is currently doing in regards to public health access and equity?
And as it turns out, State Representative Nikki Eduardo, you are first to respond, a minute and a half.
First, I'll say people don't come to Madison Cass to get high. They come to Madison Cass because there's been a breakdown that is tied to people's race, tied to where they grew up, tied to their poverty. People come to Madison Cass because of the same reason that there are public health breakdowns across the state. And that is that we don't focus our resources on the people who are doing the work. And so the piece of legislation that I would pass is something that I've been advocating for throughout COVID. First, we have to disaggregate the data and know exactly where the exacerbation of public health inequities are going on. That has to do with transit inequity, that has to do with housing inequity, that has to do with job inequity, because the social indicators of health are broader than simply what happens in your body, or even with regards to behavioral health. Very often, the people that have the best access to care are right in our communities, community health centers, places of faith, friends and family. We have youth across the city that are learning mental health first aid. We have youth workers across the city that have helped me engage folks that are shooting, that are mugging, and get to the bottom of the traumas that are causing them, and help those young people transition. But without the help of law enforcement to bring resources around not just diversion, but also supporting people and getting into jobs and providing for those jobs. We need a piece of legislation that mandates that municipalities that receive public health money from the state make sure that those funds go to the people in the neighborhoods.
Thank you. Each candidate is going to have 1 minute to respond to Lisa Kozinski's question. We'll go right down the road.
Our communities have been living in a public health crisis. Our social determinants of health have led Roxbury to be the leader in having 5 times the asthma rate, some of the worst violent outcomes in the Commonwealth with non-fatal shootings and homicides. We also are dying 30 to 33 years ahead of people living in the Back Bay because we've been living in a crisis. And the COVID-19 pandemic just made it worse. We knew where people were going to get sick. We knew where people were going to die. And instead, the governor chose to create vaccine equity and create places at Gillette Stadium and Fenway Park. That was totally tone deaf. And so I'm incredibly proud that as a member of the Health Equity Task Force at the state level, one thing we pushed on was that I filed a bill on vaccine equity to ensure that grassroots organizations would get the funds, that we should be doing mobile vaccinations, that we should be translating things in documents. The Black community and the Latino community is not a monolith in this city. People are speak Haitian Creole.
Thank you,
Some of them speak Caribbean Creole.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Liz.
So, as a member of the state senate, I filed the bill that created the first commission to study and eliminate racial and ethnic health disparities. One of the things that came out of that commission, by the way, the first in the country to have a statewide approach, was the creation of the Office of Health Equity, which has been virtually moribund through COVID. So one of the things I would do was to get them moving for sure. The notion of a community having to go out and raise their own money during COVID, when Massachusetts got $142 billion, is the thing that drove me back to politics. I'm here because Massachusetts got $142 billion, and the Black Boston COVID-19 Coalition, so many of you who are in the audience who've been working, if you got a vaccine, if you got test kits, if you got masks, you probably got it from the van that we still have out there today. It didn't come from the state. We had to raise our own money because we couldn't get the state.
Thank you, Diane. 1 minute.
Thank you, Karen. Let me just back up a minute because I heard, I think, Nika say that people aren't coming to Madison Cass to get high. People are coming to Madison Cass to get high. I was there Monday. I know we didn't do the tour today, but I went down there Monday. We go down as ministers all winter. We take them blankets. We take them food. One of the women that I was talking to Monday, she was shooting up in her foot while I was there. They are getting high there. And we need to look at the reality of it. They need help. As for mass health, let me just finish, then you can. Mass health, the first thing I would do is amend mass health. Yes, mass health does provide some health care, but we need to amend it so it provides the same kind of health insurance that Aetna does, the same kind of health insurance that Tufts does. And one of the conversations on Madison Cass Monday, many of them talked about health insurance.
Thank you, Vinyard. Thank you, Vinyard. Our next question is about the wealth gap, and the question will come from the Boston Herald's Mr. Cotter.
So we've all seen that study from a few years ago that had white families' wealth at 200.
Can you hear me?
No. Speak a bit more. So we've all seen the study from a few years ago that had white families' wealth at $250,000 and black families' average wealth at $8. What can the state do better to help bridge that gap?
And Representative Miranda, you'll respond first in a minute and a half.
You know, first, short of reparations, this country needs to atone, and this Commonwealth as well, for the fact that they systematically have removed Black people from the ability to create generational wealth. And it started a long time ago in slavery in Massachusetts, profited a lot. We built the boats. We sent the Native Americans and the Africans that were brought to these shores throughout the Caribbean But I would certainly focus on the fact that wealth, generational wealth, is not just also about money. The fact is that we don't have good paying jobs. We're being displaced in our communities, have been gentrified, blighted, redlined. And if you cannot get a good house, if you don't have a good job, and you can't afford to buy a home, which is one of the greatest ways to create wealth, then you're not able to prepare for the life and future you want for your families and your children. So wealth is a lot bigger than this racial wealth gap. There is a gender gap, there is a pay gap. White women make 75 cents on the dollar that a white man makes, while black and Latinx women make 48 to 52 cents for the same exact job. We're not getting paid what we need to get paid to be able to take care of our families. Massachusetts has one of the highest income inequalities in the country, and so what I would do to address that is continue to work with organizations like Beckham, Amplify Latinx, to essentially work at understanding the pay, wealth, and gender gap that we have in common.
Thank you. Diane, 1 minute to respond or rebut. 1 minute.
You know that.
1 minute. You can either respond to the question or you can offer a comment to what Liz and people said.
The question, I think, is what can the state do?
Yes.
Everything. You know, here's the reality. In the last year, 2021, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts spent $4.8 billion on contracting, purchase of goods and services. And they spent $11 million with black businesses, $12 million with Latino businesses. That's your answer right there. People, you know, I'm telling you, we need a champion, a fighter that's gonna go in there and get what's due for us. Bottom line, even during COVID, when we declared the state of emergency, what that did was free the governor and the Commonwealth executive branch up to do sole source contracting. There was no bidding during COVID. And so that meant you got a call and you got an $89 million direct, no bid contract. No black people got called even when we didn't have to bid. So when we talk about what we need to do, we need to have a voice there in the room challenging them to make sure that we get what is due for us on every level.
Thank you.
Diane said about the $4.8 billion in contracting that the state did in 2020. And the $11 million that black businesses received out of that $4.8 billion, and the 12% that the Hispanics received out of that $4.8 billion. And the amazing thing and how ridiculous it is, not only did they look at black businesses, but they took the amount of money that black nonprofits were getting from the state and included that in the 11 million. And so if you take away what the nonprofits got, black businesses got less than 11 million. And as state senator, I think one of the things, yeah, it is.
No,
I'm telling you this.
One of the,
look at the record.
Diane, let Minyard finish, please.
One of the things that we need to do is create legislation that will guarantee the certain percentage of the state contract for black business and for Hispanic businesses. Because if we don't create that kind of legislation, we won't.
Nika?
There's a lot of fast and furious throwing around the numbers here. We did not receive $142 billion. That would be 3 times the operating budget in Massachusetts.
For COVID related?
Not in Massachusetts. We did it in 3 times the operating budget.
Diane?
I have looked as a member of the House Ways and Means, as someone in regular conversation with our U.S. senators and congresspeople, as someone who has myself filed revenue bills, and who myself has brought $500,000 in COVID relief to my district, but also advocated for the $40 million that went to public housing residents around the state and got that in. I can tell you for a fact that the problem isn't money. The problem is that we're not engaging your leadership. That's why you can file an office somewhere and 2 years later it's not doing anything. That's why the $500 million might be a small number, but it has leveraged multiple millions, 100 Kids got jobs from that, 20 businesses. We have to focus on the community and put the investments there.
Thank you, thank you. Our next question is on economic development. The reporter has this question.
Okay, on economic development, the heart of this district is Bluehill Avenue, and one of the biggest issues on Bluehill is the center lane bus proposal. There has been a lot of discussion about this. Some that have embraced it, and some out there have rejected it over the years. Now, a new plan for the corridor has significant federal money invested. It seems to come with the caveat of having this center lane bus. That's what the conversation is. Would you support or oppose the center lane bus as part of an infrastructure plan that will revitalize business on Bluehill?
Diane Wilkerson will respond, minute and a half.
The center lane bus?
Lane bus.
So here's, I think the controversy is that people are living with decisions that people make and they don't always know how they get made. And they don't seem to make any sense when they do, and there doesn't seem to be a process to undo it when it's clearly stupid. You have to push the baby carriage to the middle of the street and walk up a stair to get on a bus.
Exactly.
Makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever. You feel like Roxbury, Worcester, Madison, Hyde Park is the experiment, the lab, where they try stuff that they just want to see if it works before they go anywhere else. And so what's happening is you have different parts of Blue Hill Avenue where the communities are responding differently. It's a hodgepodge mess. They are redirecting traffic through, so people don't want to have to see cars in Franklin Park, so they want them to drive down Blue Hill Avenue. At the same time, they reduce the lanes. This is the plan. They make no sense. That we have to find a way to elevate the voices of the community in a timely fashion so that they are making decisions and we're doing great decisions. One of the things I get told is we're not doing as many of those meetings, and so things are just moving and nobody quite knows how they're happening. And so the reality is that even on Zoom we can meet. You don't know if it's the city transportation, the state transportation, but we do know that it is crazy. Wait until the snow hits and you're trying to get into the middle lane for a bus.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you.
One of the corrections that I wanted to make is the federal legislation did bring the money with that provision, but it was because the city asked the federal government for that money. We had a meeting and we asked our congressman how did it happen. She said it happened because the city asked the federal government for the money. What happens is, and I live on Seaver Street, and here's what's crazy about it. I woke up one day to drive down Seaver Street. They had changed the lanes. I didn't know which way to go. I drove down American Legion Highway to go to Hyde Park. I didn't know which way to go. And so they've got on American Legion Highway as much bike lanes as they do car lanes. And you don't even ride bikes like that. I haven't seen one bike on American Legion Highway. And so I would say to those, and I talked to them and I wrote them, because what's happening is...
I'm sorry, time is up. You have 1 minute to respond, comment.
So the question really goes down to what is the role of the state senate in this? And even as a state rep, I have taken my direction from the leaders of the community. And as a candidate, I have met in Dorchester, in Madison, in Hyde Park, and in Roxbury, as well as the 3 neighborhoods I already represent, with neighborhood leaders. We need to have a more coordinated plan across our neighborhood associations and council attendant task forces. Because I'm hearing the same things across the place. And it's not just we have to find a way to help people to coordinate. I've spent my life, my 30 years, helping people to coordinate movements by coming together, building bridges, making a plan, executing that plan, evaluating that plan. One of the statewide programs I had the honor of running was an asset development program. That which my steering committee developed that power of wealth because we had Federal Reserve Bank of Boston folks on there. And the reason that we could come together and create a match savings program that closed the wealth gap is because we brought community leaders to the table to tell us how to happen.
Thank you. Ms. Respond or comment?
Economic that most of the transportation plans that have been in our communities or the plans in BPDA have not centered the voices of community folks. And what we see is that they're making changes to our community. First American Legion, Columbus Ave, and then they're saying they want to change Blue Halab. But Blue Halab hasn't recovered, I believe, since 1968. So I'm incredibly proud. I'm incredibly proud that this seat now centers along Blue Halab, so we can finally pay attention not only at the state level, at the city level, of a corridor that should be full of promise and opportunity, and it is not. What I would do would center the conversations continuously in community, not just the other side of the park, but to include community meetings that include language translation for the communities that are centered along Blue Halab to ensure we can hear what they want and what they need for a good transit system.
Thank you, Liz. Our next question is about post-pandemic recovery equity, and it will come from political Lisa Trinan.
So we know that small businesses are suffering and people are still struggling to stay in their homes. At the same time, the state is swimming in surplus money and in federal aid that remains to be spent. So what programs do you direct those funds to help with an equitable recovery in those areas that I've mentioned and others? And I will be coming back to housing leaders, so you don't have to make your answer all about housing.
Okay, Attorney Culpepper, a minute and a half.
Yeah, I think as state senator, you create legislation to create programs that, for the post-pandemic recovery, that will support the businesses that were struggling. And if you look at Dudley Station, the businesses that didn't make it through the pandemic, one of the interesting things about it is, in 2017, we had 2.1 million businesses across the country, and that was a good thing. The problem is that the businesses that we had were only averaging $77,000 annually. So what we see is that even though the black businesses are growing, they don't have the support and they don't have the influx of the funds that we should have coming from the state in order to grow that business. The demonstration disposition program, the intent was to grow the developer programs. And so what happened was, because of the $25 million that went into the program, some of the developers and contractors were able to grow their business. When you grow that business, you grow black wealth. When you grow black wealth, you grow black money coming to the black community. And so what we need to do as state senator, I would create legislation to create programs to guarantee that those businesses, even after the post-pandemic, are receiving an influx of funds that they're not receiving now. It's only fair and just that we do that.
Thank you. Lisa, would you like to respond or rebuttal comment?
Yes, economic development intersects, as you said, Lisa, with housing. And what that means is that when we solve the problem, we have to be on the ground meeting with our Main Streets businesses and the organizations that coordinate them. That's why I've been meeting on a monthly basis and during COVID weekly with my Main Streets directors. That's why I've reached out to the Main Street directors across the 2nd Suffolk District to understand how your organization is structured, how your membership is structured, and what your businesses need. That's why when I filed the legislation during COVID for recovery to tackle tenant protection, I also filed legislation for property owners and to work with my colleagues to make sure that we were lifting up tenants, property owners, and homeowners together. When I have run a couple of pilots in my district, one with the Boston Housing Authority giving grants to businesses, and one that we're just launching thanks to Leslie Cradle for $100,000 to house the people who are jobless and hanging around, formerly incarcerated, and not being given homes. I did that together with the community.
Thank you.
And that's how we'll do it going forward.
Thank you, Lisa. And Liz, 1 minute to
First things first, is there's no recovery or revitalization without addressing the root causes. We can't go back to normal, right? Normal wasn't good enough. And I think a lot of people have focused the last 2 years when we've gone through this public health crisis, a housing, an economic crisis, and a racial awakening in this country. And we're trying to address all of these issues that have exasperated in this time frame. But the truth is we've never gotten our fair share. Our communities have been in crisis for a very long time. I grew up in a community that was redlined. I understood how hard it was for my family to find a home in that community and sustain a business. I'm a former entrepreneur. What I would focus on is continue the work that I've already done to bring technical assistance support. You can have all the money the state gives you, but if you don't know how to apply for it, and you don't know how to successfully utilize those funds to build a successful business, it won't be any use. So I would continue to invest in technical assistance and foreclosure diversion. There are a lot of people who own homes that are at the brink of losing their homes.
Thank you, Diane. 1 minute.
So I'm feeling flattered because so much of what you suggest we should be doing is what we were doing until 2008. You know, one of the things that is a pretty simple process is we had quarterly meetings, you all know. In fact, hosts then, 2015, I convened the meeting with the freeze frame, which is now Beckman, at Prince Hall. We had 660 people there to talk about the color of wealth study and to come up with some plans on how we move. I'm still shocked at this idea that meeting with people and they said it's not about money, because it's all about the money. And then you can do what else you want to do with it, but there's a reason why everybody else is scrambling to get theirs. And we want to make sure that folks are working. So I'm just saying, August 2nd, which is a Tuesday, I'm going to be rolling out the most massive, transformational, bold, economic plan for Black and brown people in the city of Austin.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is about education equity, and we'll have the question from Seth Daniels, the Dorchester Reporter.
Okay. On education equity, the boundaries of this district contain more charter schools than most, and also is the home to far more charter school students than most. Many parents feel charter schools give them options, but many educators feel they take away from Boston Public Schools. Would you support the Senate District's charter schools, and would you also support any of their potential expansion plans?
And Nico, we'll start with you, minute and a half.
Education equity is what brought me into service and brought me into public service. As a young woman, as a young child, I went to 8 different public schools by the 8th grade because of those evictions I spoke of earlier. And then was plopped out of that because somebody thought I was going the wrong way and called my grandmother at Martin Luther King Branch Library and got me scholarships to go to private school. I was angry that my fellow students were being left behind. I was angry that the people that I was tutoring, especially young Black men, were being pushed along the system with D's without being taught how to read. This is where many of our structural racist problems begin. The same rules that are codified against us can be recodified for us, and that's what I've been working on. I was really excited to be part of the team that convinced our holdouts in the Student Opportunity Act, which fully funded education for the first time, that we also have to fund low-income school districts. With respect to charter schools, I do support the existing ones. I do not support expanding them. The initial charter of the charter schools was to create innovation that would go across the system. What instead we have is further expanded inequities. We need to invest all of the resources. We've been underfunded at $1 billion per year for the last 25 plus years. And that's just documented. We need to invest our resources in making sure that every school has everything that every child needs, and that's our constitutional obligation.
Thank you.
I support the current charter schools. I do not support expansion. I think every child and every family in our district deserves a leader that supports them regardless of the school that they choose for their children, whether it be Medco, Boston Public Schools, charter schools, parochial, or private. As a person who's visited all the 17 schools in my district as a state representative, I know that there's deep inequity. We have the highest concentration in the Mid-Suffolk of ELL learners. We have the highest concentration of special education students. Schools like the Cash have 45% of their students with an IEP. And so it's really incredibly important to support all families, all children with their chosen educational places that they choose to get educated. And it's not just about K to 12. My mom dropped out of Madison Park High School to have me. I went to the John D. O'Brien. We've had very different life outcomes because of the school's investments in both of those schools versus Madison Park versus the John D. O'Brien.
Thank
That'll
you.
increase investment as well.
Thank you. Diane? Diane?
I support all the charter schools in the district. And I've always said parents are going to do whatever they think they can do to get their children the best. And if Hitler opened a charter school tomorrow, there would be people in line because they are desperate for a better opportunity for their kids. And I think we all understand that. We all understand that. The charter schools have been particularly poor community partners in that they rely on Chapter 30B. They don't do business with people in this community, although they teach their children. Their contracting for Black and Latino businesses is horrible. And my position is that we have to keep pushing them on that, just like we can push BPS. But yes, I do support them. I do not support lifting the cap, because in fact, the way we do funding for charter schools now, in fact, does take away from public school. And if we can figure out a way to do it, and there is, then I wouldn't have that objection. But if taking away from Boston is the result of supporting them, I would support it.
Thank you. Minyard, 1 minute.
Thank you, Karen. I think one of the ways that you solve this problem is you fully implement the Student Opportunity Act from now until 2027. We know that there was 1 year where the money that should have been implemented under the Student Opportunity Act was not implemented. I think that the state legislature, the Senate, and the governor should make a point and be intentional about implementing fully the Student Opportunity Act. What that would do is it would bring money to the schools that have buildings that are falling apart. I think they need to take COVID-19 money, use that money to implement the Boston Public School 10-year plan. I think our children are living in working and going to school in public schools that are falling apart. I think we look at the Dearborn as an example of a public charter school that a minister began painting to get the Dearborn to where it is today. I think that's the example that we use. Thank you, Karen.
Our next question is about housing, and Lisa Kozinski from Politico has a question.
I told you we'd be getting back to housing. So I don't need to tell anyone how unaffordable it is to live in Boston or anywhere around it at this point. So I'd like to hear your solutions for the housing crisis, both for renters and for homeowners. And if that involves rent control, please elaborate on what rent control looks like to you specifically.
Ms. Miranda, we'll start with you, 1.5 minutes.
As I've been knocking on doors and talking to residents for the last 8 months, housing has been the #1 topic of conversation. And I fundamentally believe that housing has to be a human right. You cannot afford to buy a home in the neighborhood you love and live. It has deep consequences for community as folks are moving to Brockton, Stoughton, and other places to find affordable housing. It actually rips apart the civic fabric of our community. So it's incredibly important that people have a safe, healthy, affordable place to live. I've supported many of the legislation at the State House. This is an issue we have to do everything and together. We have to build more affordable housing. We have to invest more in home ownership programs. We have to ensure that we have rent stabilization, which I believe is about capping at a certain percentage, particularly for developers and those that own multiple units beyond 10 units. We hear a lot from small business and small homeowners who say, hey, I took out my life savings to buy these 2 or 3 homes. I don't think that I should be held at the same standard as other developers. But one of the crises that I see happening in the housing crisis is that we are also, and we're discriminatory toward folks that have eviction queries and folks that need extra support, and therefore those folks cannot find a suitable place to raise their families. And so I would continue to invest in RAFT, and continue to invest in Section 8 to ensure that everyone who deserves a place to live that is healthy and safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane. 1 minute. Yes, Diane.
So the way we do housing in Massachusetts, I think, is fundamentally broken and will never be fixed unless we blow it up and reset it. Here's what I mean. We focus on affordable housing. And so because we focus on affordable housing, we give the majority of our housing money to nonprofit CDCs. They build the housing, no opportunity for the support and growth of Black and Latino and women-owned businesses. And then they require, in order to be eligible, you have to be poor to get in the house. Not a problem. Here's the issue. You have to stay poor to stay in the house. This cycle where we now in Roxbury have 78% of the rental housing is subsidized and low income, which means all of the big new buildings that are going up, 3/4 of the residents that live there are automatically out of the picture. They can't even engage in a purchase. And until we change the way we do it, and maybe we do it the way everybody else does it, it's going to be.
Thank you, Karen. My policy does just that. I issued a housing policy 2 weeks ago, and there are 3 tenets to my housing policy with regard to home ownership. You know, we did Academy Homes. Academy Homes is now tenant owned. Campbell Gardens in the South End is now tenant owned. What I proposed in my housing policy is that we take a housing like Franklin Field, it's state and federally supported, renovate it, put in a management company, transfer ownership to the tenants at Franklin Field. They deserve to be owners of that development. They should have some kind of ownership right in that development. The second thing that we should do is we should take Section 8. You might not realize it, but Section 8 holders in New Hampshire are buying single-family homes. We have Section 8 holders in Boston, those vouchers. They can also buy Section 8 homes. They can buy homes with their Section 8. So I call on Mass Housing and the BHA to create a Section 8 home ownership program so they too can own a home.
Thank you.
There's one more to it.
Lisa, 1 minute.
Housing instability has been my life, not only as a kid, but here in Boston for different reasons. My husband and I lived in more than 20 different places and actually landed in JP because we have friends that were willing to give us very low rent and ended up making our home there. We just bought our first home. I'm going to be 50 next year. We just bought our first home last year. Thank you. The types of policy that we need, this is where I've invested a lot of my energy. I am on the housing committee now. And we need not only cash, so yes, we've been raising revenue. We need not only land and more opportunities for developers, we need to make sure those are Black developers and Black communities. We also need to make sure that the $8 billion that I researched for 3 years to put to BU kids to find out in publicly owned land gets put to better use. It's just laying there and only big developers get to use it. Our communities need that. Yes, the nonprofit CDCs need to continue to get money so that they can develop, but we need more partnerships than that.
Thank you. It's now time for closing statements from all of our candidates. We'll start. Nika, State Representative Nika Elugardo.
I love Boston, I love this district, and our destiny is to lead the country in understanding what a new kind of leadership looks like. I have a lot of bills that I didn't mention today. I have a lot of accomplishments that I didn't mention today. The reason that I keep focusing on the leadership of my community, because that's the difference that we actually need. You can pass every one of the 8,000 plus bills in the legislature today, and you would not see any difference in your life. That's what's been happening. It's not that my colleagues don't work very hard. It's not that we're not behind the scenes pressing the governor, pressing the Senate president, pressing the leadership in the House. It's that we haven't reorganized how we think about leadership to put you and your voice in the center. I have spent my life learning from the best. How do you center the voices of people in a community to build a movement? I'm not here to impress you tonight. I'm here to tell you that the opportunity and the pathway is before us. As everything is flying apart, it needs to fly apart because those systems do not support us. And the ones that do are in our communities right now, and that's the world we need, and that's what I will help you to lead.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank tonight's host and for all the candidates in this race. You all are brilliant and capable to be the second Suffolk. I feel like I'm uniquely positioned to support and work in the State House for everyone in every corner, whether it's in the South End or Hyde Park or in my community of Dudley Street. In the 3.5 years I've been at the State House, I've delivered on many things: environmental justice, gender-based voting, maternal and birthing justice, which I could not speak about tonight, and also addressing issues of mass incarceration. I don't think there's any more important issue than addressing the climate crisis and ending mass incarceration for our communities. I understand that leadership is both a privilege and a responsibility, and I take it to heart. I'm the person that thinks about what keeps you up at night. You don't have to guess who your senator is. If I'm elected, I'm not only a legislative powerhouse and a progressive champion, but I'm someone who shows up when it matters and will show up every and each time it
matters. State Senator Diane Wilkerson.
Most important thing you can do as a state senator or a state rep is to be in the rooms where the decisions are made. And guess what? It's not in Gold Hall. It's in that building with the golden dome on it, and I think certainly there are other things you can do. So here's the bottom line for me. I'm the only one sitting here who's actually done it, and done it well. And by the way, did it better than anyone else. I have more precedent-setting legislation than any other legislator, and I did not say any other black legislator. Wrongful conviction compensation bill, I reminded again last Monday when I heard Sean Drumgold died. Because he was one of the first recipients. It's real for me. It's real. Anti-predatory lending bill, racial gender profiling, the things that matter to us. $250 million CRA insurance bill. We're still the only state in the nation that has it. I have been humbled by the level, breadth, and depth of the support. You're gonna see our youth roll out next week. And here's the bottom line. I ain't scared.
I want to thank the Communities of Color organization for hosting and organizing this debate. There's a reason why they call me the housing candidate, and the reason why I'll be the housing senator is because I have what they call a gentrification stabilization plan. When I was called on with COVID, I went out, created a $10 ministry, Karen, to feed folks during COVID. When folks called on me, when they needed food, we created a food pantry. We still feed folks 200 meals every 2 weeks. They come to the church. When Charles Morrell had the issue with the white supremacists, he called Minyard Culpepper, and he called me to stand with him and fight for justice. I've been fighting for justice all of my life. I am in this race to win it, and when I win, we all win. I need your support. September 6th, vote Minyard Culpepper. Thank you for tonight, and may God bless you. Thank you.
That was good, y'all, right? So in closing, I just want to thank our co-founder of Communities of Color, Darryl Smith, for coordinating this program. Everybody, please give it up for Darryl. He worked really, really hard to get everything together, and he did an amazing job. So Darryl, I don't know where you're actually working, but thank you so much for doing this for us. Also want to thank Ms. Alda Witherspoon for her assistance in organizing this program. Please give it up for her as well. She worked very, very hard to make this happen as well. I want to also thank Ms. Karen Holmes Ward for her moderating. Can you guys please wait until we're finished the program? Thank the panelists, Lisa Kozinski from Politico, Sean Philip Cotter from the Boston Herald, Seth Daniels from the Dorchester Reporter. Thank you guys for continuing to show up and report on things that are happening in our community. We're looking forward to seeing you all soon. We also want to thank our sponsors, our physical sponsors, and our Bernie and Holmes for allowing us to have this debate here. We want to thank Communities of Color, Board of Democratic Committees 8, 9, 11, 12, 14, 15, and 17, and 18, the BNA, Black Ministry Alliance, Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, Newmarket Business Association, and the Boston Medical Center. We also want to thank Mayor Wu and the City of Boston, and you guys for showing up tonight. Thank you all again for continuing to show up. We hope that folks have earned their vote. And we want also to give a couple shout outs to some of us that are here. Representative Tammy Gouveia, who is also a candidate for lieutenant governor, and former city councilor Tito Jackson, who was always showing up for us as well. So thank you all so much. Stay home safe, and thank you again.
She's running for sheriff. This young lady's running for sheriff, so give her all the support she can get.
Thank you so much. Oh, yes, you did. Thank you so much.
That's what I'm doing in the audience. At it. He said, at it?
Yeah, I heard it.
He's got to get it right on that.
What's up, man? How you doing?
What you doing? High tech.
What you been up to, man? You did?
I'm really happy.
All right.
But it's a little bit more work.
Oh, there you go. There you go. All right now. They can't hear you. She's ignoring you. There you go. Give yourself a plug.
I'm the babysitter.
Yeah. You go, big man, right? What's going on, big man? What you been up to, man?
Stop getting me eating these chips.
Oh, okay. What's going on, man? It's Diane Wilkerson right here. There's Vito the Penis in the house. There you go.
I'm still in here. They can't get me out of nowhere, honey.
There you go. got Liz Miranda in the house. How's it going? Alright guys, I'm getting ready to head up out of here. It's a pretty good turnout. Alright. Here she goes. Alright guys, it was a good turnout. Get you guys on the next one.